They were laughing in the next room, her own family, plotting how to be rid of her like she was spoiled meat. Sarah Blackwood pressed her back against the hallway wall, fingers digging into the peeling wallpaper as her father's voice carried through the door. Thank the heavens Ezra Stone asked for a daughter. He didn't specify which one. More laughter. Her mother's shrill giggle. We'll be free of her sharp tongue at last. Sarah's jaw tightened. Fine. They wanted her gone? She'd go. But when she walked out that door, she'd never look back. And they'd regret underestimating her for the rest of their miserable lives. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. Now, let's see what happens when the daughter nobody wanted becomes the woman everyone underestimated. The August heat made everything worse. Sarah stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her mother arrange flowers that would be dead by morning. Rebecca sat by the window in a dress too fine for an ordinary Thursday, practicing her smile in the reflection. Clara hummed while embroidering pillowcases for a hope chest that seemed to expand weekly. The Blackwood daughters, performing their designated roles. 2 of them, anyway. Move, Rebecca said without looking up. You're blocking the light. Sarah shifted half a step, not because she was asked, because the sun was in her eyes. Samuel received a letter yesterday, their mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when announcing something she wanted to seem casual. From Ezra Stone. Rebecca's head snapped up. Clara's humming stopped mid-note. The mountainman? Clara breathed. The one with the timber business? The very same. Their mother, Margaret Blackwood, born Margaret Chen, though she'd worked hard to bury that detail, set down her pruning shears with deliberate care. He's made a proposal. For marriage. The flowers forgotten, both sisters turned fully toward their mother now. Sarah watched from the doorway, still unacknowledged, as the performance began. He must be nearly 40, Rebecca said, though her tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a drawback. And wealthy, from what father says. Respectable, their mother confirmed. Owns half the timber rights in the valley. His homestead is modest, but his holdings are significant. Sarah knew what came next. She'd seen this dance before. The careful weighing of prospects, the subtle competition, the way her mother would guide the conversation toward whichever daughter she'd already decided was the best match. Usually Rebecca, sometimes Clara, when the suitor seemed more interested in domesticity than beauty. Never Sarah. What did father say? Rebecca asked, already smoothing her hair. Their mother's smile grew sharp at the edges. He said, yes, of course. It's an excellent match. The ceremony could be as early as next month. Next month? Clara clutched her embroidery hoop. But that's generous, their mother cut in. Mr. Stone is generous with his timeline. He understands these things take preparation. She paused, and Sarah saw the shift in her expression, the subtle tightening around her mouth that meant something unpleasant was coming. There's just one small complication. Rebecca leaned forward. What complication? The letter specified a daughter of the Blackwood household. Margaret's voice went flat. It mentioned Sarah by name. The room went silent. Then Rebecca laughed, a single sharp bark of disbelief. Sarah? He asked for Sarah. That can't be right, Clara said. Why would he? I don't know. Their mother's composure cracked slightly. Samuel read it 3 times. I am writing to request the hand of your daughter, Sarah Blackwood, in marriage, clear as day. Sarah's fingers tightened on the doorframe. She still hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. They hadn't even noticed she was there. Well, that's ridiculous, Rebecca said. Obviously there's been a mistake. He's probably heard of the Blackwood daughters and assumed, there's no mistake. Their father's voice came from behind Sarah, making her step aside as Samuel Blackwood entered the kitchen. He was a tall man, getting soft around the middle, with the kind of face that looked stern even when he was pleased. Right now, he wasn't pleased. I've confirmed it. Ezra Stone knows exactly which daughter he's asking for. But why? Their mother asked. Has he even met her? Apparently. Samuel dropped the letter on the table. Sarah could see Ezra's handwriting from where she stood. Strong, clear strokes, no flourishes. He says he encountered her some years ago, didn't specify where or when. Sarah's mind spun backward, sorting through memories. She'd barely left the property in years except for the market incident, she said quietly. All eyes turned to her. Rebecca looked annoyed at the interruption. Clara seemed startled, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. Their parents just looked tired. "What incident?" Samuel demanded. Sarah stepped fully into the room. 4 years ago, the market in town. There was a situation with Mr. Brennan and his hired man, the one who had the accident with the wagon. Brennan was trying to dock his pay for the medical costs, said it was his own carelessness. I spoke up. "You caused a scene," her mother corrected coldly. "I told the truth. The wagon's wheel was cracked. Everyone could see it. Brennan knew it was cracked and sent the man out anyway." Sarah kept her voice level, though the memory still burned. "Someone had to say something." "Someone did," Rebecca muttered. "You. In front of half the town. Do you know what people said about us after that?" Sarah didn't answer. She knew exactly what people had said. The same things they always said about her. Too bold, too sharp, too unwilling to let things lie. Her family had spent months smoothing over that particular embarrassment. "Ezra Stone was there?" Samuel's tone suggested he was connecting pieces he didn't like the shape of. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. I wasn't paying attention to the crowd." "Of course you weren't." Her mother's laugh was brittle. "You were too busy playing hero for some hired hand you'd never met." "He lost 2 fingers when that wheel shattered," Sarah said quietly. "Brennan should have paid for the doctor." "That's not the point," Samuel snapped. "The point is—" He stopped, seemed to gather himself. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "The point is, we have a proposal. From a man of substance and reputation. And for some inexplicable reason, he specified you." The way he said "you" made it sound like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Sarah looked at the letter on the table, at her father's frustrated expression, at her mother's barely concealed disgust, at her sisters, who were staring at her like she'd stolen something that belonged to them. "You could write back," she said. "Explain the confusion. I'm sure he'd be just as happy with Rebecca." "Oh, I'm sure he would," Rebecca said icily. "Any man in his right mind would be." "The problem," Samuel said, ignoring this, "is that declining outright would be awkward. Ezra Stone has business dealings with half the valley. Insulting him could have consequences. So don't insult him." Sarah kept her voice neutral. "Tell him I'm spoken for. Or ill. Or we could just send you." The words came from her mother, sharp and sudden. Margaret was looking at Sarah with an expression that was almost calculating. "Why not? He asked for you specifically. You go, you marry him. Everyone's satisfied." "Mother," Clara started, but Margaret spoke over her. "Think about it, Samuel. We've been trying to find a match for her for years. No one wants a girl who argues with her elders and embarrasses her family in public. This is the first real proposal she's ever had. The only proposal she's likely to get." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Not surprised, she'd known her mother thought these things, but hearing them said aloud so casually was different. "She has a point," Rebecca said slowly. A smile was starting at the corners of her mouth. "And it would solve the problem, wouldn't it? Sarah gets married to a respectable man, we maintain good relations with the Stone family, and we're finally rid of her," Clara finished, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, don't," Sarah's voice cut through the room, "don't pretend it's anything other than what it is." Her father frowned. "Sarah, you want me gone. You've always wanted me gone." She looked at each of them in turn. "I'm too difficult, too stubborn, too much trouble. And now someone's offering to take me off your hands, and you're jumping at the chance." "That's not," her mother started. "Isn't it?" Sarah felt heat rising in her throat, but she kept her voice steady. "You've spent my whole life trying to make me smaller, quieter, more like them." She gestured at her sisters. "And when I wouldn't, you punished me for it. Extra chores, locked in my room, denied dinner because I spoke out of turn or showed disrespect." She turned to her father. "You told me last year that you'd failed as a parent, that I was your greatest disappointment." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I said you were difficult to manage." "Same thing in the end." Sarah pulled herself up straighter. "So here's what's going to happen. I'll go. I'll marry Ezra Stone, and you'll never have to worry about managing me again." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "You'll go willingly?" "Did I say that?" Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I said I'll go, because my other option is staying here, in a house where I'm barely tolerated, waiting for you to find some other way to be rid of me. At least this way it's done." "Sarah," Clara said quietly, and for a moment she almost sounded sorry, but she didn't say anything else, didn't object, didn't suggest an alternative. None of them did. "Fine," Samuel said after a long moment. "I'll send word to Ezra Stone. The wedding can be arranged for 3 weeks, their mother said quickly. "That's enough time to prepare without seeming too eager." Without seeming too eager to get rid of me, Sarah thought, but didn't say. 3 weeks, then. Her father looked at Sarah, and something in his expression might have been regret, if she was feeling generous enough to read it that way. She wasn't. "You should prepare yourself. Write to him, perhaps. Get to know—" "No." Sarah shook her head. "If he wants to marry a stranger, that's his choice. I'm not going to pretend this is something it's not." She turned and left the kitchen before anyone could respond. Behind her, she heard Rebecca's voice. "Well, this is going to be an awkward 3 weeks." Laughter followed her down the hall. Sarah's room was the smallest in the house, tucked at the back where the roof sloped low enough that she had to duck near the window. Her sisters had the larger rooms facing front, with better light and more space. This had been the sewing room before Sarah was born, and it had never quite stopped feeling like storage. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and looked around at the few things that were hers. A hairbrush with a cracked handle, 3 dresses, all practical, all too worn for her sisters to want. A book of poetry someone had given her father, who'd passed it to her when he realized it wasn't about farming or business. The small wooden box where she kept the few coins she'd managed to save from the rare time she was allowed to work in town. Not much to show for 23 years of life. She pulled out the box and counted the coins. $17. Not enough to go anywhere, really. Not enough to start over alone. But maybe enough to give herself a choice, if it came to that. The window was open, letting in the humid evening air. From downstairs, she could hear her family talking, their voices rising and falling in animated conversation. They were probably planning the wedding already. Her mother would want something respectable, but not too expensive. No point wasting money on Sarah. Rebecca would insist on at least attending to maintain appearances. Her father would handle the business arrangements, treating it like any other transaction. And Sarah would be the commodity being traded. She wasn't naive enough to think Ezra Stone was rescuing her. Men didn't propose to women they barely knew out of kindness. He wanted something, a wife to cook and clean probably, someone to manage his household while he ran his business. He'd chosen her specifically, which meant he'd heard something about her, decided she'd suit his purposes, and made his offer. The fact that her family was so eager to accept told Sarah everything she needed to know about her value here. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to prepare for a marriage she didn't want, to a man she didn't know, in a place she'd never seen. 3 weeks before her family successfully erased the problem of Sarah Blackwood from their lives. Fine. If they wanted her gone, she'd go. But she wouldn't go broken. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry or beg or ask them to reconsider. She'd leave with her head up and her spine straight, exactly as she was. And if Ezra Stone didn't like what he got, well, that was his problem. He'd asked for Sarah Blackwood. He'd get her, just not the version anyone expected. The 3 weeks passed in a strange blur of activity that somehow excluded Sarah herself. Her mother took charge of preparations with the efficiency of someone organizing a military campaign. Invitations were sent to the minimum number of people required to make the event respectable. A dress was procured, simple, practical, nothing like the elaborate gown Rebecca would eventually wear when her time came. Arrangements were made with the church, though Father Matthews seemed confused about which Blackwood daughter was getting married. "Sarah?" he'd said, loudly enough that half the congregation heard. "I thought, well, that is, congratulations, my dear." He'd looked at her with the same expression people usually reserve for funerals. Sarah spent most of those 3 weeks avoiding her family. She took on extra chores that kept her outside or in the barn, mucking stalls, mending fences, anything that meant she didn't have to sit through another dinner of pointed comments and false well-wishes. Rebecca swung between satisfaction and irritation. Satisfaction that Sarah was leaving, Irritation that she was getting married first, even if it was to a man no one had seen in years who lived in the mountains like a hermit. "At least wait until you meet him before you look so smug," Sarah had said, after one particularly barbed comment. "I'm not smug," Rebecca replied. "I'm relieved, for all of us." Clara was quieter, which was somehow worse. She'd catch Sarah's eye sometimes and open her mouth like she wanted to say something, then close it again. The night before the wedding, she'd knocked on Sarah's door. "Come in," Sarah had called, expecting her mother with some last-minute instruction. Instead, Clara slipped inside, closing the door carefully behind her. She stood there in her nightgown, twisting her hands together. "I wanted to say—" She stopped, started again. "I'm sorry that this is happening like this." Sarah set down the shirt she'd been folding. "Are you? It's not fair, the way they talk about you, the way they—" Claire's voice dropped. "I should have said something, defended you. But you didn't." "No." Clara looked at the floor. "I didn't, and I'm sorry for that." Sarah studied her younger sister. Clara had always been the softest of them, the most eager to please. She genuinely seemed troubled by what was happening, but not troubled enough to actually do anything about it. "Thank you for saying that," Sarah said finally. "But it doesn't change anything." "I know." Clara twisted her hands harder. "Are you scared? Of tomorrow?" The honest answer was yes. Sarah was terrified. But she'd learned young that showing fear only gave people ammunition. "I'll manage," she said instead. Clara nodded, lingering another moment before slipping back out. Sarah returned to her packing, her hands steady even as her mind raced. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she'd leave this house, this family, this life that had never quite fit. Tomorrow she'd marry a stranger and move to a place she'd only heard about in passing. Tomorrow, everything would change. She should sleep. She knew that. But instead, she sat by the window, watching the stars come out one by one, and wondered what kind of man asked to marry a woman he met once, 4 years ago, at a market. The wedding was small, aggressively small. Father Matthews performed the ceremony in the church's side chapel, reserved for private events or funerals. Sarah's family sat in the front row, her father rigid, her mother composed, her sisters whispering behind their hands. A handful of business associates attended, men who worked with Samuel and felt obligated to show their faces. Mrs. Chen, Sarah's maternal grandmother, sat in the back and glared at everyone impartially. Ezra Stone arrived exactly on time. Sarah heard the commotion outside, horses, voices, the sound of boots on the church steps. Then the door opened and he walked in. Tall. That was her first thought. Easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark coat. His face was weathered from sun and wind, marked with small scars that suggested a life spent working with his hands. Dark hair, streaked with gray at the temples. Maybe 40, maybe older. Difficult to tell. He moved like someone who knew exactly how much space he occupied and wasn't apologetic about it. Their eyes met across the chapel. Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to look away first. Let him see what he was getting, a woman in a plain dress with work-roughened hands and no illusions about why she was here. Something shifted in his expression. Not disappointment, not quite approval either. More like recognition. He walked down the aisle, his boots loud against the stone floor, and stopped in front of her. "Sarah Blackwood," he said. His voice was low, rough-edged. "Mr. Stone." She kept her tone neutral. "Ezra." He held out his hand. "We're about to be married. Might as well use first names." She took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. He held on a moment longer than necessary, studying her face like he was memorizing it. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. The question surprised her. "Are you?" "Ask the question first." Sarah glanced toward her family. Her father was watching with barely concealed impatience. Her mother had that tight smile that meant she was tolerating something unpleasant for the sake of appearances. "I'm here," Sarah said. "That's as sure as it gets." Ezra's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. "Good enough." Father Matthews cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was mercifully short. Sarah repeated words she barely heard, her mind elsewhere. When Ezra slipped the ring onto her finger, simple gold, slightly too large, she felt the weight of it like a shackle. "You may kiss the bride," Father Matthews said. Ezra looked at her, a question in his eyes. Sarah gave the smallest nod. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers briefly, chastely. It was over before she could decide how to feel about it, and just like that, she was married. The reception was held at the Blackwood house because appearances had to be maintained. Sarah's mother had arranged a modest meal, inviting just enough people to make it seem respectable while keeping costs low. Sarah stood near the door, watching Ezra shake hands with her father and exchange pleasantries with the handful of guests. He fit into the social requirements easily, she noticed. Not chatty, but confident, the kind of man who could hold his own in a business conversation without needing to dominate it. "Well," Rebecca appeared at her elbow, glass of wine in hand. "You did it. You're actually married. Seems that way." "He's not terrible to look at," Rebecca continued, eyeing Ezra across the room. "Older than I'd want, but still. Better than I expected." Sarah didn't respond. She was watching Ezra talk to Mr. Harrison, one of her father's business partners. Harrison was laughing at something, gesturing widely. Ezra just nodded, his expression carefully polite. "You could at least pretend to be happy," Rebecca said. "Why?" Sarah turned to her sister. "You don't want me to be happy. You want me to be gone. I'm doing you a favor by leaving. The least you can do is not pretend this is something it's not." Rebecca's smile went sharp. "Still so bitter, even on your wedding day." "Realistic," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." Before Rebecca could respond, Ezra appeared beside them. Up close, Sarah could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair. He nodded to Rebecca, then looked at Sarah. "Ready to go?" he asked. Sarah blinked. "Now?" "Unless you want to stay longer." His tone suggested he didn't particularly care either way. She looked around the room. Her mother was talking to Mrs. Harrison about fabric prices. Her father was already deep in conversation with another merchant. Clara sat in the corner, picking at her food. No one was paying attention to the bride. "I'm ready," Sarah said. They left without fanfare. Her trunk was already loaded onto Ezra's wagon. He'd brought it around earlier. Sarah climbed up onto the seat, adjusting her dress, while Ezra settled beside her and took the reins. "Sarah!" Her father appeared on the porch. "A word?" Ezra looked at her. Sarah nodded, and he waited while Samuel approached the wagon. "I expect you to be respectful," her father said quietly, looking up at her. "Ezra Stone is a good man. You're lucky he was willing to take you." Sarah felt Ezra go very still beside her. "I'll be exactly what I've always been," she said. "If that's not enough, he can send me back." Her father's jaw tightened. "See that you don't embarrass us further." He stepped back. Ezra made a small sound, could have been a laugh, could have been disgust, and clicked to the horses. They pulled away from the house, from the few guests still lingering, from her family standing on the porch watching them leave. Sarah didn't look back. There was nothing there worth seeing anymore. They rode in silence for the first hour. The road wound up into the foothills, leaving behind the flat farmland of the valley. Trees grew thicker here, pine and oak, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The temperature dropped slightly, the air fresher, cleaner. Sarah watched the landscape change and tried not to think about what came next. She was married to a stranger, heading toward a place she'd never seen, leaving behind a life that had never wanted her anyway. Not the worst situation she'd been in, but close. "You can talk, you know," Ezra said finally. "I don't bite." Sarah glanced at him. "Neither do I. Usually." That almost smile appeared again. "Good to know." More silence. The horses' hooves thudded against packed dirt. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called out. "Why did you ask for me?" The question came out before Sarah could stop it. Ezra didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "Saw you once," he said finally, 4 years ago, in town. "The market." "The market," he confirmed. "You were giving Brennan hell about that wagon wheel, half the town watching, and you didn't care. Just kept pushing until he admitted the truth." Sarah remembered. Brennan had been furious. Her family had been mortified. The hired man had gotten his medical costs covered, but Sarah had spent 2 weeks confined to her room for the embarrassment she'd caused. "That's why you wanted to marry me?" she asked. "Because I made a scene?" "Because you stood up when nobody else would." Ezra glanced at her. because you saw something wrong and spoke up, even knowing there'd be consequences. That takes spine. It takes stupidity, according to my family. Your family's wrong. The certainty in his voice surprised her. Sarah studied his profile, the strong jaw, the weathered skin, the small scar cutting through his eyebrow. You don't even know me, she said. I know enough. He shifted the reins. Spent the last 4 years asking around about you. Heard you were difficult, argumentative, too smart for your own good. Everything I heard just convinced me more. Convinced you I was worth marrying? Convinced me you were worth asking for. He met her eyes. Whether you're worth marrying, I figure we'll both find out. Sarah didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, turning her attention back to the road ahead. They climbed higher into the mountains, the road narrowing to little more than a trail. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, beautiful in a wild way that Sarah had never experienced living in the valley. How much further? She asked. Another hour. Ezra nodded toward a gap in the trees ahead. We'll stop at the creek to water the horses. The creek was shallow and clear, running over smooth stones. Ezra helped Sarah down from the wagon, his hands firm at her waist, lifting her like she weighed nothing, then led the horses to drink while she stretched her legs. Sarah walked to the water's edge and knelt, cupping her hands to drink. The water was cold, clean, better than anything that came from the well at home. She splashed some on her face, washing away the dust from the road. Here. She looked up. Ezra was holding out a piece of bread and some cheese wrapped in cloth. Figured you might be hungry, he said. Wedding didn't have much food. Sarah took it, realizing she was actually starving. She'd been too nervous to eat at the reception. Now her stomach growled embarrassingly loud. Ezra sat beside her on a flat rock, unwrapping his own portion. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the evening birds. What's your house like? Sarah asked eventually. Solid. Built it myself, mostly. 2 rooms downstairs, sleeping loft up top. Needs work. I've been putting off repairs because I didn't have reason to make it nicer. He glanced at her. That'll change now. Don't change it for me, Sarah said quickly. I don't need fancy things. Didn't say fancy. Said nicer. There's a difference. He finished his bread. Place is clean, at least. I'm not a slob. That's something. More than something. I've seen how some men live when there's no woman around. Like animals. He stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. We should keep moving. Want to get there before full dark. They climbed back onto the wagon and continued up the mountain. The road got rougher, forcing them to slow down. Sarah gripped the seat as they bounced over roots and rocks. Sorry, Ezra said after a particularly hard jolt. Should have warned you it gets rough up here. I'll survive. Yeah. He shot her a look. I think you will. Finally, just as the last light was fading from the sky, they rounded a bend and Sarah saw it. A cabin, larger than she'd expected, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it, she could make out the shapes of other buildings. A barn, what looked like a workshop, storage sheds. Home, Ezra said simply. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. Wait there a minute. He jumped down and disappeared into the cabin. Light flared, a lamp being lit, then another. When he came back out, Sarah could see the warm glow spilling through the windows. Ezra helped her down again, this time keeping his hands on her waist a moment longer. Welcome to it, he said quietly. Such as it is. Sarah looked up at him, this man who was now her husband. In the lamplight, his eyes were darker, harder to read. Thank you, she said, meaning it more than she expected. He nodded and released her, stepping back to give her space. Let's get you inside. We can deal with your trunk in the morning. The cabin was clean, Sarah noticed immediately. Not just clean, organized. A large main room with a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A smaller room off to the side that she could see was a bedroom. A ladder leading up to what must be the loft. Bedroom's yours, Ezra said, following her gaze. I'll take the loft. Sarah turned to him. You're giving me the bedroom? Figured you'd want privacy. Door locks from the inside if that makes you feel better. He moved to the fireplace, kneeling to build up the fire. Told you before, I'm not going to force anything. We're married on paper, but that's all it has to be until you decide different. And if I never decide different, He looked at her over his shoulder. Then we'll be roommates who happen to be legally bound. I've had worse arrangements. The fire caught, spreading warmth through the room. Ezra stood, dusting off his hands. There's water in this pitcher in the bedroom, wash basin on the stand, extra blankets in the chest if you need them. He moved toward the ladder. I'm usually up early, dawn or just before. Don't worry about breakfast. I'll handle it. Ezra? Sarah waited until he turned. Why are you being so decent about this? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Your family treated you like you were a burden they couldn't wait to be rid of. Your father all but said it to my face at the wedding. I watched how they talked to you. His jaw tightened. I asked you to marry me because I saw strength in you, but I'm not stupid. I know you didn't have much choice in accepting, so the least I can do is make sure you have choices now. Sarah felt something in her chest loosen slightly. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. He climbed the first few rungs of the ladder. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how this works. He disappeared into the loft, leaving Sarah alone in the warm glow of the fire. She stood there for a long moment, processing everything that had happened in the span of a single day. This morning she'd woken up as Sarah Blackwood, the unwanted daughter. Tonight she was Sarah Stone, married to a man who'd given her the bedroom and a locked door and the promise of choices. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection yet, but it was more respect than she'd had in years. Sarah went into the bedroom, her bedroom now, and closed the door. Didn't lock it. That felt too much like accepting fear, and she'd decided years ago not to be afraid. The bed was simple but well made, with a thick quilt that looked handmade. The water pitcher was full, the wash basin clean. A small window looked out into the darkness of the forest. She unpacked the few things she'd brought, her spare dresses, the book of poetry, the wooden box with her small savings. Everything fit easily into the chest at the foot of the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and finally let herself feel the weight of the day. The wedding. The journey. This strange new place with this strange man who'd asked for her specifically and then given her space she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Outside, an owl called. The fire crackled in the other room. Above her, she could hear Ezra moving around in the loft, the quiet sounds of him settling in for the night. Sarah lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. What had she gotten herself into? More importantly, what was she going to do about it? But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, she was simply too tired to do anything but close her eyes and let sleep take her under. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was that, for the first time in years, she'd made it through an entire day without someone telling her she was wrong, difficult, or disappointing. It was such a small thing, but it felt like everything. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and something frying. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was still at home, that her mother was cooking breakfast and would soon be calling her down to help. Then she opened her eyes and saw the unfamiliar ceiling, the window showing trees instead of the neighbor's house, and remembered. She was married. She was in the mountains. She was in Ezra Stone's cabin, her cabin now, technically. She sat up, still wearing yesterday's dress, now badly wrinkled. The room was cold. The fire must have died down overnight. Through the door, she could hear movement, the clatter of a pan, footsteps on the wooden floor. Sarah stood and smoothed her dress as best she could, then opened the door. Ezra stood at the stove, his back to her, working a spatula through a pan of eggs. He'd already dressed for the day in work clothes, rough pants, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was damp, like he'd washed at the pump outside. Coffee's hot, he said without turning around. Cups are on the shelf above the basin. Sarah found a cup and poured herself some. The coffee was strong, almost bitter, but warm. She wrapped her hands around the cup and stood awkwardly near the table, unsure what to do with herself. Sit, Ezra said. Eggs are almost done. She sat. Ezra brought over 2 plates, eggs, thick slices of bread, some kind of meat she didn't recognize. He set one in front of her, then took the other seat. It's venison, he said, nodding at the meat. From last week's hunt. If you don't eat it, that's fine. There's more bread. Sarah took a bite. It was gamier than the pork or chicken she was used to, but not bad. It's good. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Sarah kept sneaking glances at him, trying to figure out what kind of man she'd actually married. He ate efficiently, without wasting motion. When he caught her looking, he didn't seem bothered by it. "I need to check the timber markers today," he said, setting down his fork. "Up on the north ridge. Usually takes most of the day." He paused. "You can come if you want, or stay here. Up to you." "What would I do here?" "Whatever you want. Read, rest, look around. There's food in the pantry, water pumps out back." He gestured toward the shelf near the fireplace. "I've got some books up there if you're interested. Not much, mostly technical stuff about forestry and carpentry, but there's a few novels." Sarah thought about staying in the cabin alone all day, with nothing but her thoughts for company. Then she thought about going back into the mountains with this man she barely knew. "I'll come," she said. Something shifted in Ezra's expression. Approval, maybe. "Dress warm. It's colder up high." He cleared the plates while Sarah went back to the bedroom and changed into her most practical dress, the brown one she'd worn for farm work. It wasn't fashionable, but it was sturdy. She braided her hair tightly and secured it with pins, then pulled on the shawl she'd packed. When she came out, Ezra was filling a pack with supplies. He looked at her outfit and nodded. "Good. You've got sense about these things, at least." He held out a worn jacket. "This'll be too big, but it's warmer than that shawl." Sarah took it. The jacket smelled like wood smoke and pine. She put it on. He was right. It was too big, the sleeves hanging past her hands. But it was warm. They walked out into the morning. The air was crisp, sharp in her lungs. Frost still clung to the grass in the shaded areas. Sarah could see her breath. "This way," Ezra said, heading toward a trail that led into the trees. Sarah followed, her feet crunching on fallen pine needles. The trail climbed steadily upward, winding between massive trees that must have been growing for decades. Sunlight filtered through the branches in golden shafts. "You own all this?" she asked. "A good portion of it. My land goes from the creek you saw yesterday up to the ridgeline, then east to where it meets the Callahan property." He pointed through the trees. "About 800 acres total. Not all of it's accessible, but the timber rights are worth keeping." Sarah tried to imagine owning that much land. Her father's farm had been maybe 40 acres, and he'd considered himself prosperous. "How did you get it?" "Bought it piece by piece over 15 years. Started with just the homestead and the land immediately around it. Then old Marcus Trent wanted to retire, sold me his parcel. Then the Harrison tract came up for sale after the family moved east." Ezra stepped over a fallen log, then offered his hand to help Sarah across. She took it, his grip steady as she climbed over. Lot of work. Lot of lean years. But it paid off. They walked for another hour, climbing higher. Sarah's legs burned from the constant upward slope, but she didn't complain. Ezra set a steady pace, not too fast, occasionally stopping to point out landmarks or explain something about the forest. "See those marks?" He indicated a series of cuts on a tree trunk. "That's how we track which trees are ready for harvest. 3 notches means it's marked for this season. 2 means next year. 1 means it's too young still." "Who does the cutting?" "I've got a crew that comes up in late fall, early winter. 6 men, usually, sometimes 8, depending on how much we're taking. They fell the trees, limb them, cut them to length. Then in spring, when the snow melts, we float the logs down to the mill." Sarah watched him as he talked. He seemed different out here, more relaxed, more animated. This was his world, she realized. Not the social obligations of weddings and polite conversation, but this. The mountains, the trees, the work. "You love it," she said. He glanced at her. "The work?" "All of it." Ezra considered that. "Yeah, I do. It's honest work. You put in effort, you see results. No politics, no games. Just you and the mountain and what you can make of it." He started walking again. "Some people think it's lonely. Maybe it is, but I prefer it to the alternative." They reached the ridge by mid-morning. Sarah stood catching her breath while Ezra surveyed his markers, checking a small notebook he pulled from his pocket and making notes. The view from up here stole what little breath Sarah had left. The valley spread out below them, a patchwork of farms and forest. Beyond that, more mountains, rolling away into blue distance. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It is." Ezra came to stand beside her. "First time I came up here, I was maybe 20, working for Marcus Trent, learning the timber trade. Saw this view and thought, I want this, not just to visit, but to own." to be part of. He was quiet for a moment. Took me another 8 years to make it happen, but I did. Sarah looked at him. You're not what I expected. You said that last night. I know, but I mean it more now. She turned back to the view. My father always talked about land like it was just currency, something to use or sell or leverage. But you talk about it like it matters? Like it's alive. Ezra smiled, a real smile this time, not the almost smile she'd seen before. That's because it is. People forget that. They see trees as lumber, land as property, but it's more than that. It's a whole system. You take care of it, it takes care of you. You abuse it, eventually it stops giving. He pulled out some bread and cheese from his pack, offering half to Sarah. They sat on a flat rock and ate while looking out over the valley. Can I ask you something? Sarah said after a while. Go ahead. Why didn't you marry before now? You're 40, right? Most men are married by 30. 38, Ezra corrected. And I was engaged once. Long time ago, before I had all this. Girl named Catherine, from one of the Valley families. We were young, thought we knew what we wanted. What happened? She wanted a husband who'd settle down in town, run a shop or work in an office. I wanted this. He gestured at the mountains around them. We fought about it for 2 years before we both admitted it wasn't going to work. She married a banker. Last I heard, she's got 4 kids and a nice house on Main Street. Do you regret it? Ezra shook his head. No, she made the right choice for her. I made the right choice for me. But after that, I stopped looking. Figured if it happened, it happened. If it didn't, I had the work. He looked at her. Then I saw you at that market, and I thought, there's someone who might understand. Understand what? That sometimes doing the right thing costs you, that standing up for something means standing alone. He picked at the bread in his hands. You defended that hired man knowing your family would be angry. You did it anyway because it mattered. That's rare. Sarah felt heat in her cheeks. They were so angry. Didn't speak to me for a week except to tell me I'd embarrassed them. Oh, their embarrassment isn't your burden, Ezra said firmly. You did right. They should have been proud. They were never proud of me. The words came out before Sarah could stop them. I was always too much of something or not enough of something else. Rebecca was the beautiful one. Clara was the sweet one. I was just the difficult one. Difficult because you had a spine. Difficult because I couldn't keep my mouth shut when I saw something wrong. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, even though she wasn't cold. They tried to fix me, my mother especially. Lessons in deportment, in proper behavior, how to smile without showing too much teeth, how to agree without actually having an opinion. I was terrible at all of it. Good, Ezra said. Sarah looked at him. Good? I didn't ask for a woman who smiles without showing teeth and agrees without thinking. I asked for you. He stood, brushing crumbs off his pants. Come on, there's something else I want to show you. He led her along the ridge to where the trees thinned out, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood the remains of an old cabin, just the stone foundation and the chimney now, everything else long since collapsed or rotted away. This was the original homestead, Ezra said, built by a trapper named Calloway back in the 30s. He lived up here alone for 20 years before selling to Marcus. The cabin wasn't livable by then, so Marcus built the one we're in now, down lower, where it's easier to access. Sarah walked around the ruins, imagining what it must have been like to live up here, truly alone, dependent on yourself for everything. Why'd you bring me here? Because I come up here sometimes when I need to think, figure out what I want versus what I'm supposed to want. He leaned against the old chimney. Thought you might appreciate having a place like that, somewhere you can go when you need space. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant more than Sarah knew how to express. Thank you. They stayed a while longer, then started the long walk back down. The descent was easier but required more care. The trail was steeper going down, littered with loose rocks. Ezra went first, occasionally reaching back to steady Sarah when the path got tricky. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was starting to lower. Sarah was exhausted, her legs aching, her feet sore, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from actually doing something rather than just enduring. I need to feed the horses and check the equipment, Ezra said. You should rest. I'll make dinner when I'm done. I can cook, Sarah said. Didn't say you couldn't. Said you should rest. He nodded toward the cabin. You just hiked 6 miles uphill and back. Take a break. Sarah wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a massive yawn. Ezra laughed. See? Rest. I'll be an hour or so. He headed toward the barn while Sarah went inside. She added wood to the fire, then sank into one of the chairs at the table. Her feet were definitely going to blister. She should have worn different shoes. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Sarah let her eyes close just for a moment. She woke to the sound of the door opening. Ezra came in carrying an armload of wood, which he stacked near the fireplace. Didn't mean to wake you, he said. I wasn't really sleeping. Sarah sat up straighter, trying to look alert. Just resting my eyes. Right. His tone suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't push it. Dinner will be ready soon. Nothing fancy, just stew from yesterday. Warmed up. Can I help? You can set the table if you want. They moved around each other in the small space, finding a rhythm. Sarah set out plates and utensils while Ezra ladled stew into bowls. The stew was thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, better than anything Sarah's mother had made in the last year. This is good, she said after the first bite. Mrs. Brennan's recipe. She gave it to me years ago when I mentioned I was tired of burned beans. Ezra ate a spoonful. I'm a decent cook now, out of necessity, but I won't claim to love it. I don't mind cooking, Sarah offered. If you want, we can trade off. I'll do it some days, you do it others. He mopped up stew with a piece of bread. Or we can cook together. Whatever works. Sarah realized this was how he approached everything, practical, flexible, no rigid rules about who should do what. It was disorienting after a lifetime of strict gender expectations. Your family would be horrified, she said. A man cooking his own meals. Your family's horrified by a lot of things that make perfect sense. Ezra refilled his bowl. I lived alone for 15 years. Was I supposed to starve because cooking's women's work? That's nonsense. They finished dinner and cleaned up together. Ezra washing, Sarah drying and putting away. When they were done, Ezra retreated to the loft with a book, while Sarah sat by the fire with her poetry collection. She tried to read, but her mind kept wandering. This morning she'd been prepared for awkwardness, maybe even hostility. Instead, she'd spent the day hiking mountains with a man who pointed out landmarks and shared his history and showed her secret places. Who treated her like she had sense, who seemed genuinely interested in what she thought. It was strange, unsettling. Not bad, though. Sarah looked up at the loft. She could hear Ezra moving around up there, the creak of the boards under his weight. Ezra? She called. His face appeared over the edge of the loft. Yeah? Thank you, for today. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're welcome. Sleep well, Sarah. He disappeared back into the loft. Sarah sat by the fire a while longer, then finally went to her room. Tomorrow would be another day. Another chance to figure out what this strange new life was going to look like. But for tonight, she was too tired to worry about it. The days developed a rhythm. Ezra worked, checking timber, maintaining equipment, handling the 100 small tasks that came with managing a homestead. Sarah helped where she could, learning as she went. How to split wood properly so it burned clean. How to preserve meat so it lasted through winter. How to read the weather by watching the sky and the animals. Sometimes they worked together, side by side. Other times they worked separately, meeting up for meals. Ezra never demanded her help, but he never refused it either. When she offered to mend his shirts, he thanked her and showed her where he kept the sewing supplies. When she suggested reorganizing the pantry to make things easier to find, he told her to do whatever made sense. It was so different from home, where every task had been assigned, every movement monitored. Here, Sarah could spend an entire afternoon reading if she wanted. Or she could help Ezra repair the barn door. Or she could explore the woods around the cabin, learning the trails and landmarks. The freedom was intoxicating, also terrifying. You're thinking too hard, Ezra said one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. How do you know I'm thinking? You get this line right here. He tapped the space between his eyebrows. And you stop talking, which usually means your brain's going too fast. But Sarah hadn't realized she was that transparent. I'm just trying to figure this out. Figure what out? This. Us. What we're supposed to be doing. Ezra stretched his legs out, crossing them at the ankle. We're living, that's all. There's no supposed to about it. But there are rules, expectations. My mother would say, "Your mother's not here." Ezra's voice was firm, but not unkind. And what she'd say doesn't matter. You're not her property anymore. You're not your father's property. You're not even my property despite what the law says. He looked at her. You're just Sarah, that's enough. What if it's not? The question came out smaller than Sarah intended. What if I mess this up? What if I'm still too difficult, too stubborn, too... Sarah. Ezra waited until she met his eyes. Do you know why difficult people exist? She shook her head. Because easy people let the world run over them. Because somebody needs to stand up and say, no, this isn't right, or yes, this matters, even when it's uncomfortable. He turned back to the sunset. Your family wanted you to be easy because easy is convenient, but easy doesn't change anything. Easy doesn't make things better. Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen. You really believe that? I wouldn't have asked for you if I didn't. He stood, stretching. Come on, let's walk before it gets too dark. They walked the trail to the creek, not talking much, just being. The evening air was cool, filled with the sound of water and wind through the trees. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. My father used to hit me, Sarah said suddenly. The words just came out, unbidden. Not often, but when I really pushed too far, when I embarrassed him badly enough. He'd wait until we got home, then take me to the barn where no one could hear. Ezra stopped walking. His face had gone very still. How old were you? Started when I was 12. Last time was 2 years ago, right after the market incident. He split my lip. Sarah touched her mouth reflexively, though the scar had long since faded. He told me if I ever humiliated the family like that again, it would be worse. And you believed him? Yes. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. That's why I stopped going to town. Stopped putting myself in situations where I might see something that needed speaking up about. It was easier to just stay quiet. Stay home. Ezra was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. If he ever touches you again, he'll answer to me, and I won't be gentle about it. Sarah looked at him, surprised by the anger in his voice. I'm not telling you this because I want you to fight him. I'm telling you because you keep asking why I am the way I am. That's why. I learned to be quiet because noise had consequences. And yet you're still noisy when it matters. Ezra started walking again, his jaw tight. That takes more courage than I gave you credit for. They walked the rest of the way in silence. When they got back to the cabin, Ezra went to his loft without another word. Sarah heard him pacing up there for a long time before it finally went quiet. She'd upset him. She hadn't meant to, but she had. The next morning, Ezra was already up when Sarah emerged from her room. He had breakfast ready, eggs and bread, same as always. Sit, he said. Sarah sat. Ezra brought over the plates, then took his own seat. But he didn't start eating. He just looked at her, his expression serious. I need to say something, he began. About yesterday. About what you told me. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I asked you to marry me because I thought you were strong, and you are, but I didn't understand what that strength cost you, what you had to survive to build it. He paused. I'm sorry for not seeing that sooner. Sarah didn't know what to say. No one had ever apologized for not understanding her before. And I need you to know, Ezra continued, that here, in this house, on this land, you're safe. You can be as loud or as quiet as you want. You can speak up or stay silent. Whatever you choose, there won't be consequences, not from me. Why? Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Why does it matter to you? Because you matter. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Because you're my wife. Because you're a person who deserves to be treated with respect. He picked up his fork. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Comfortable. Safe. After breakfast, Ezra announced he needed to go into town to pick up supplies. You should come, he said. Meet some people. See what passes for civilization around here. Sarah hesitated. She hadn't been to town since the market incident. The thought of facing people, of being judged, made her stomach twist. "Hey!" Ezra's hand covered hers on the table. "You don't have to, but I think it might be good. Show them you're not afraid." "I am afraid," Sarah admitted. "I know. Do it anyway." So she did. She changed into her best dress, the one from the wedding, cleaned and pressed, braided her hair, tried to look like someone worth respecting. The town of Pinewood was small, just a main street with a general store, a church, a blacksmith, and a handful of other shops. Ezra drove the wagon right up to the general store and helped Sarah down. "Mr. Stone!" A woman emerged from the store, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 50, with gray streaked hair and a friendly face. "We've been wondering when you'd bring your bride to meet us." "Mrs. Brennan, this is my wife, Sarah." "Sarah, this is Helen Brennan. She runs the store with her husband." "Pleased to meet you," Sarah said, offering her hand. Mrs. Brennan took it warmly. "Oh, we're so glad Ezra finally settled down. Been telling him for years he needed a wife up there in those mountains." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, dear, we were starting to think he'd become a permanent bachelor." "Nearly did," Ezra said dryly. "Turned out I was just waiting for the right woman." More people drifted over as word spread that Ezra Stone had brought his new wife to town. Sarah met the blacksmith, Tom Harris, and his wife Anna. The pastor's wife, Mrs. Matthews. The doctor, an elderly man named Carlson, who looked Sarah over with professional interest. "You look healthy enough," he said. "That's good. Mountain living isn't for the weak." "She's not weak," Ezra said firmly. "Didn't say she was. Just making an observation." Dr. Carlson smiled at Sarah. "You need anything, medical supplies, advice, whatever, you come see me. First visit's free for newlyweds." "Thank you," Sarah said. Most people were friendly, if a bit curious. A few seemed genuinely happy for Ezra. But Sarah caught whispers too, people talking behind their hands when they thought she couldn't hear. "That's Samuel Blackwood's daughter, isn't it? The difficult one. Heard she made quite a scene a few years back." Poor Ezra. Hope he knows what he's getting into. "Isha." Sarah's face burned, but she kept her composure. Ezra, walking beside her, seemed oblivious to the gossip. Or maybe he just didn't care. They were heading back to the wagon, arms full of supplies, when a man stepped into their path, Thomas Brennan. Sarah recognized him immediately, older now, but still with that same cruel set to his mouth. "Well, well," he said, "if it isn't the girl who likes to stick her nose where it doesn't belong." Ezra went very still beside her. "Brennan. Stone." But Brennan's eyes stayed on Sarah. "Heard you got married. Didn't realize you'd chosen the Blackwood troublemaker. Brave man." "Or smart," Ezra said coolly. "Depends on your perspective." Smart would have been choosing one of the other daughters. The pretty one or the sweet one? Brennan smiled unpleasantly. "But I suppose you've always had peculiar taste." Sarah felt Ezra tense, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan," she said clearly, "how's your hired man doing? The one who lost his fingers when your faulty wagon wheel shattered? I heard he finally found work elsewhere after you refused to compensate him properly." Brennan's face went red. "That was his own damn fault." "It was your fault," Sarah interrupted. "Everyone knew that wheel was cracked. You sent him out anyway, and when he got hurt because of your negligence, you tried to punish him for it." She tilted her head. "How many other workers have you mistreated since then? How many more accidents have happened because you're too cheap to maintain your equipment?" A small crowd had gathered, watching. Brennan looked around, realizing he had an audience. "You always did have a sharp tongue," he said tightly. "No wonder your family was so eager to marry you off." "And you always were a coward who blames others for your mistakes," Sarah shot back. "Some things don't change." Brennan took a step toward her, his hand coming up. Ezra moved like lightning, putting himself between them. "Touch her," he said quietly, "and you'll lose more than your temper." The two men stared at each other. Brennan was bigger, broader, but Ezra had that kind of coiled stillness that suggested violence waiting to be unleashed. Finally, Brennan stepped back. "She's not worth it," he muttered. "You're right about that," Ezra agreed. "She's worth far more than you could understand." He took Sarah's arm to, "Come on, we're done here." They walked back to the wagon in silence. Sarah was shaking, from anger, from fear, from adrenaline. Ezra loaded the supplies, then helped her up onto the seat. "That was stupid," he said as they drove out of town. Sarah's heart sank. "I know. I'm sorry. Stupid brave," Ezra clarified. "Brennan's been running his mouth for years about that incident. Nobody's ever stood up to him twice. You did." He glanced at her. "Though maybe next time warn me before you start a fight in the middle of Main Street." "You're not angry? At you? No." His jaw tightened. "At him, yes. At everyone who treats you like you're the problem when you're the only one with the guts to speak truth." He shook his head. "They don't deserve you." Sarah didn't know what to say to that, so she just sat beside him as they rode back toward the mountains, toward the cabin that was starting to feel more like home than any place she'd ever lived. That night, after dinner, Sarah found Ezra on the porch again, looking out at the darkening sky. "Can I join you?" she asked. "Always." She sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I like it here," Sarah said finally. "On the mountain, away from all of them." "Me too. But we can't hide forever." Ezra turned to look at her. "We're not hiding. We're choosing. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." He leaned back against the porch post. "Hiding means you're afraid. Choosing means you know what you want and you go after it, regardless of what other people think." He paused. "Today, in town, you weren't hiding. You were choosing to stand your ground." "It felt good," Sarah admitted. "Scary, but good." "That's how you know it mattered." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. And Sarah thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something here she'd never had before. Not just safety, not just respect, but the freedom to be exactly who she was, without apology. And that was worth more than anything her family had ever offered her. The weeks turned into months, and Sarah found herself settling into a life she'd never imagined possible. The work was hard, harder than anything she'd done at her father's house. But it was hers. When she split wood, it warmed her own home. When she preserved vegetables, she was feeding herself and Ezra through the winter. Every task had purpose, weight, meaning, and Ezra. He remained constant, steady, exactly what he'd promised to be. He worked from dawn until dusk most days, but he never demanded the same of Sarah. When she wanted to help, he welcomed it. When she needed time alone, he gave her space without question. But something was shifting between them. Sarah felt it in the small moments, when their hands brushed reaching for the same tool, when she caught him watching her across the dinner table, when his voice softened saying her name. The careful distance they'd maintained was becoming harder to keep. It was late October when everything changed. Sarah had spent the afternoon gathering the last of the herbs from the garden before the first hard frost hit. Her hands smelled of sage and rosemary as she hung the bundles to dry in the kitchen. Outside, she could hear Ezra chopping wood, the steady rhythm of the axe hitting timber. She went to the window and watched him work. He'd stripped down to just his undershirt despite the cold, sweat darkening the fabric across his shoulders. The axe rose and fell with practiced precision, each stroke splitting the wood cleanly. Sarah's mouth went dry. She'd seen him work before, obviously, but something about this moment, the late afternoon light, the way his muscles moved under the thin fabric, the absolute competence of his movements, made her see him differently. Not as the stranger who'd married her out of some misguided notion of her strength, not as the business arrangement her family had forced on both of them, but as a man. A good man. A man she was starting to want in ways that terrified her. She turned away from the window, pressing her palms against the cool counter. This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to live here, work here, exist alongside him. She wasn't supposed to develop feelings. The door opened and Ezra came in, bringing cold air and the smell of fresh-cut wood with him. "Getting cold out there," he said, crossing to the fire to warm his hands. "Frost tonight for sure." "The herbs are all in," Sarah said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Should last us through winter." "Good." He straightened, rolling his shoulders. "I've got enough wood split for a few weeks. Tomorrow I need to check the north boundary. There's been signs of poachers up there. Probably just someone taking a deer or two, but I should make sure they know this land's occupied." "Can I come?" Ezra looked at her, surprised. "It's a long ride. We'd have to camp overnight." "I don't mind." Something flickered in his expression. "All right." We'll leave at first light. They spent the evening preparing, packing food, checking equipment, gathering bedrolls. Sarah tried not to think about what it meant, spending a night away from the cabin with him. It was practical, nothing more. Just two people managing a homestead together. But when she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Through the floor, she could hear Ezra moving around in the loft, the creak of boards as he settled in. She wondered if he was having as much trouble sleeping as she was. They set out before dawn, the horse's breath fogging in the cold air. Ezra had saddled both horses, a big roan gelding for himself and a smaller bay mare for Sarah. "Her name's Maple," he said, helping Sarah mount. "She's steady, won't spook easy. Just give her head on the rough patches." Sarah settled into the saddle, adjusting the reins. It had been years since she'd ridden, but the skills came back quickly. They rode single file up the narrow trail, climbing higher into the mountains than Sarah had been before. The forest changed as they climbed. The trees were older here, massive pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air smelled different, wilder, less touched by human presence. Sarah saw signs of wildlife everywhere, tracks in the soft earth, claw marks on tree trunks, scat from animals she couldn't identify. "Bear?" Ezra said when she pointed to some particularly large droppings, probably getting ready to den for winter. "They're not usually aggressive this time of year, too focused on eating, but we'll keep our food hung high tonight just in case." They stopped around midday to rest the horses and eat. Ezra found a small clearing with a stream running through it, good grass for the animals. "How much further?" Sarah asked, stretching her legs. Her thighs already ached from hours in the saddle. "Another few hours to the boundary. We'll make camp before dark, check the area in the morning." He handed her some dried meat and hardtack. "You doing all right? We can rest longer if you need." "I'm fine." Sarah wasn't about to admit weakness, even though every muscle in her body was protesting. Just not used to riding this much. "You're doing well." Ezra settled onto a fallen log, chewing his food thoughtfully. "Better than most would, first time out this far." They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the stream and the wind in the trees. A bird called somewhere overhead, a sound Sarah didn't recognize. "Pileated woodpecker," Ezra said, following her gaze. "Big red crest. You'll see them sometimes, hammering on dead trees looking for insects." "How do you know all this?" Sarah asked. "The trees, the animals, everything?" "Spent a lot of time alone up here, had to learn or starve." He finished his meal and stood. "Marcus taught me some, the old trappers taught me more. Rest you figure out by paying attention." They rode on. The trail got rougher, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses over particularly treacherous sections. Ezra went first, testing the ground, then helped Sarah across. His hands were sure and strong when he steadied her over loose rocks or steep inclines. By late afternoon, they reached the northern boundary. Sarah could see where Ezra's land ended, marked by old stone cairns and blazes on certain trees. Beyond that, the forest looked the same, but Ezra's expression hardened as he studied the area. "Someone's been through here." He pointed to disturbed earth, broken branches. "Recently, last day or two." "Poachers? Maybe. Or someone testing to see if I'm paying attention." He walked along the boundary examining the signs. Could be nothing. Could be someone planning to take timber come spring. They made camp in a sheltered spot near the boundary, close enough to watch but far enough back to not be obvious. Ezra hung their food from a high branch like he'd promised, then built a small fire in a ring of stones. "Keep it low," he said. "Don't want to advertise we're here." As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Sarah huddled close to the fire, wrapped in her blanket. Across from her, Ezra sat with his rifle across his knees, alert and watchful. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch." "Watch for what?" "Probably nothing, but if someone's planning to cause trouble, better to know about it before they know about us." He fed another stick to the fire. "I'll wake you in a few hours. You can take second shift." Sarah tried to sleep, but the ground was hard and cold, and every sound made her jump. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to Ezra's hand on her shoulder. "Your turn," he said quietly. "Wake me if you hear anything unusual. Anything at all." He lay down in his bedroll and was asleep within minutes, the rifle beside him. Sarah sat up, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders, and stared into the darkness beyond the fire's small circle of light. The forest at night was alive with sounds, rustling in the underbrush, the hoot of an owl. Something larger moving through the trees. Deer, probably, or elk. Sarah's heart jumped at every noise, but nothing came close to their camp. She fed the fire carefully, keeping it low like Ezra had shown her, watched the stars wheel slowly overhead. Thought about how strange her life had become, that she was sitting in the wilderness with a loaded rifle nearby, watching for poachers. Strange, but not bad. Around midnight, she heard voices. Sarah froze, straining to hear. Yes, definitely voices, coming from the direction of the boundary. Low and male, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. She reached over and touched Ezra's shoulder. He came awake instantly, completely alert. Voices, she whispered, near the boundary. Ezra sat up, listening. After a moment, he nodded and reached for his rifle. Stay here, he mouthed. Keep the fire going. If I'm not back in an hour, ride back to the cabin and get help from town. I'm coming with you. Sarah, I'm coming. She kept her voice low but firm. You might need backup. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded and handed her a long hunting knife. Stay behind me. Stay quiet. If I tell you to run, you run. Understand? They moved through the darkness, following the sound of voices. Ezra moved like a ghost, barely disturbing the undergrowth. Sarah did her best to keep up, stepping where he stepped, avoiding dry branches. The voices grew clearer. 2 men, maybe 3, talking in normal tones now. Told you, stone never comes up here. Too much ground to cover. Just take what we can carry. Few good trees, that's all. Nobody'll know the difference. Ezra stopped behind a large pine, Sarah beside him. Through the branches, they could see a small group of men with a lantern, examining the trees near the boundary. One had an axe. Another had a saw. Timber thieves, Ezra breathed in her ear. Worse than poachers. He stepped out into the open, rifle raised. Evening, gentlemen. The men whirled around. Sarah saw 3 faces caught in the lamplight. Rough men, working men, startled and guilty. Stone, one of them said. We were just about to steal timber from my land, Ezra finished. His voice was calm, conversational, but the rifle never wavered. That about sum it up? Now, hold on. I know you, Ezra interrupted, looking at the man with the axe. You're Callahan's hired man. Jimmy, right? The man with the axe shifted uncomfortably. Jim Peterson, and we weren't stealing exactly. Just thought, you thought I wouldn't notice a few trees going missing. Ezra's tone hardened. You thought wrong. Sarah stepped out beside him, and all 3 men's eyes went to her. That your wife? One of them asked. That's right. Sarah, these are trespassers. Trespassers, this is my wife, who's considerably better at tracking than I gave her credit for. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Now, you've got 2 choices. 1, you put down those tools, get off my land, and never come back. 2, I ride down to town tomorrow and report this to the sheriff, and you spend the next few months in jail for attempted timber theft. You can't prove. Ezra fired the rifle into the air. The sharp crack echoed through the trees. All 3 men jumped. I've got a witness, he said calmly. My wife, who will testify that she saw you on my land after dark, with cutting tools, examining my timber. That's plenty for Sheriff Morrison. He lowered the rifle slightly. So what's it going to be? The 3 men looked at each other. Finally, Jimmy Peterson dropped the axe. We're going, he muttered. No need to get the law involved. Good choice. Ezra waited while they gathered their tools and started walking away. When they were almost out of sight, he called out, And Jimmy, tell Callahan if I catch anyone else on my land, I won't be so reasonable next time. They waited until the men were well and truly gone, the sound of their retreat fading into silence. Then Ezra lowered the rifle and let out a long breath. Well, he said, that was exciting. Sarah realized she was shaking. You could have been killed. They weren't going to kill anyone, just thieves looking for easy money. He looked at her. You did good. Waking me, coming along. Having a witness made all the difference. I was terrified. Me too. He started walking back toward their camp. Fear's not a bad thing. Keeps you sharp. It's what you do with it that matters. They returned to find the fire burning low. Ezra built it back up while Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. Get some sleep, he said. I'll watch the rest of the night. I'm not going to be able to sleep. Try anyway. But Sarah couldn't settle. She sat beside him, staring into the fire, replaying the confrontation in her mind. Have you had to do that before? She asked. Confront people on your land? A few times. Usually doesn't amount to much. Most folks respect boundaries when you remind them where the lines are. He poked at the fire. But Callahan's been testing me for years. He wants my timber rights, thinks he can pressure me into selling. Will you? No. The answer was immediate, certain. This land is mine. I worked for it, bled for it. I'm not giving it up because some greedy neighbor thinks he deserves it more. Sarah understood that. Understood it in her bones, the need to hold on to something that was truly yours. They sat together as the night wore on, keeping watch, keeping each other company. Around 3 a.m, Ezra finally convinced Sarah to sleep for a few hours. She curled up in her bedroll and closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and Ezra's steady breathing nearby. When she woke, dawn was breaking and Ezra had coffee brewing. He handed her a cup, and they drank it watching the sun come up over the mountains. Beautiful, Sarah said quietly. Yeah. But when she looked over, Ezra was watching her, not the sunrise. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement of something that had been building for weeks. Sarah looked away first, her cheeks warm. Should we head back? Soon. Ezra stood, stretching. Want to check the boundary in daylight first, make sure they didn't damage anything. They spent an hour walking the line, examining trees, making sure everything was intact. The timber thieves hadn't had time to do any real harm, but Sarah could see which trees they'd marked for cutting. Big pines, old growth, worth a lot of money. They knew what they were after, Ezra said grimly. This wasn't random. Someone sent them specifically for these trees. Callahan? Probably. He pulled out his knife and carved fresh blazes into the marked trees, claiming them clearly. I'll need to come up here more often. Make sure people know this land is actively managed. They rode back to the cabin in better weather, sunshine breaking through the clouds. Sarah's body ached from 2 days of riding and a night on the hard ground, but she felt good, strong, useful. When they finally reached the cabin, Ezra helped her down from the horse. His hands lingered at her waist. Thank you, he said, for coming, for being there last night. You're welcome. They stood there too close, his hand still on her waist. Sarah could feel the warmth of him through her clothes, could smell wood smoke and pine and something that was just him. Sarah, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart started pounding. What? These last few months, living with you, working beside you. He stopped, seeming to search for words. I asked you to marry me because I saw strength in you, but I didn't think. Ezra, let me finish. His eyes were intense on hers. I didn't think I'd fall in love with you, but I have. Somewhere between showing you the old homestead and watching you face down Brennan in town and sitting beside you under the stars last night, I fell completely in love with you. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't think. You love me? Yes. He said it simply, certainly. And I know that wasn't the arrangement. I know you agreed to a marriage of convenience, and I'm not asking you to feel the same way, but I needed you to know, because keeping it hidden was starting to feel like lying. Sarah's mind spun. All the small moments over the past month suddenly recontextualized themselves. The way he'd look at her across the dinner table, the gentleness in his voice when he said her name, the care he took to make sure she felt safe, valued, seen. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. Ezra's hands dropped from her waist, and he stepped back. I just needed you to know, so you could make your own choices with all the information. He turned and started toward the barn to tend the horses. Sarah stood frozen in the yard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Did she love him? She didn't know. She'd spent so long protecting herself, keeping people at a distance, that she wasn't sure she remembered how to let someone in. But she knew she felt safe with him. Knew she looked forward to their evenings on the porch, their rides through the mountains, the quiet companionship of their daily work. Knew that when she thought about the future now, it included him. Was that love, or just gratitude for being treated decently for the first time in her life? Sarah went into the cabin and sat at the table, her head in her hands. Outside, she could hear Ezra moving around the barn, the familiar sounds of him caring for the horses. Normal life continuing while her internal world tilted sideways. She needed to think, needed to figure out what she actually felt versus what she thought she should feel. But when Ezra came in an hour later and started making dinner without a word, moving around the kitchen with that quiet competence she'd come to rely on, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. "Can I help?" she asked. He glanced at her, his expression carefully neutral. "If you want." They worked together, preparing the meal, falling into their established rhythm. Ezra chopped vegetables while Sarah tended the stove. They moved around each other in the small space without getting in each other's way, a dance they'd perfected over months of practice. Dinner was quiet. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with everything unsaid. After they cleaned up, Ezra headed for the door. "I'm going to check the fence line before dark," he said. "I'll be back in an hour or so." Sarah watched him go, then stood there in the empty cabin, alone with her thoughts. She thought about her family, about how they'd made her feel small, wrong, unwanted, about the years of trying to be something she wasn't, the punishment when she failed. She thought about Ezra, about how he'd never once asked her to be anything other than herself, about how he'd given her space and respect and the freedom to choose. And she thought about the moment in the forest when he'd stepped out to confront those men and she'd followed without hesitation. Not because she had to, not because he'd demanded it, but because facing danger beside him felt right in a way she couldn't explain. When Ezra returned, Sarah was waiting on the porch. "Everything all right?" he asked, climbing the steps. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said. Ezra went still. "All right. I've been thinking about what you said, about loving me." Sarah stood, facing him directly. "And I realized something." "What's that?" "I don't know if I love you." The words came out blunt, honest. "I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. My family never showed me. I have no reference point." Ezra's expression didn't change. "I understand. But," Sarah continued, "I know that when I'm with you, I feel safe. I know that I trust you in a way I've never trusted anyone. I know that when something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. And when something scares me, you're the person I want beside me." She took a step closer to him. "I know that I like who I am when I'm with you. That you make me want to be brave instead of hiding. That when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I've never felt seen before." Another step. "I don't know if that's love, but it's something, and I want to find out what it is. I want—" She stopped, gathered her courage. "I want to be your wife. Really your wife, not just on paper." Ezra's eyes had gone dark. "Sarah, are you sure?" "No," she admitted. "I'm terrified, but I'm sure I want to try." He reached for her slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hands came up to cup her face. "We'll go slow," he said quietly. "As slow as you need." "I don't want slow." Sarah's hands came up to grip his shirt. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to stop holding back." "Sarah!" She kissed him. It wasn't graceful. Their teeth clicked together at first, and Sarah wasn't sure what to do with her hands. But Ezra gentled the kiss, slowing it down, showing her without words. His mouth was warm and firm against hers, patient but intense. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "Come inside," he said. Sarah nodded. He led her into the cabin, then up the ladder to the loft she'd never seen before. It was small, barely large enough for the bed that took up most of the space. A single window looked out toward the mountains. Ezra lit a lamp and warm light filled the small space. Then he turned to Sarah, his expression serious. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said. "We can just—" "I'm ready." Sarah's voice shook slightly, but she meant it. "I'm choosing this, choosing you." Ezra kissed her again, deeper this time. His hands were careful on her back, her shoulders, learning the shape of her. Sarah let herself lean into it, let herself feel without thinking for once. They undressed each other slowly, with fumbling hands and nervous laughter when buttons wouldn't cooperate. Sarah felt self-conscious about her body, too thin, too angular, marked with small scars from years of hard work, But Ezra looked at her like she was something precious. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. "I'm not. You are to me." They came together in the small bed, awkward at first, then finding their rhythm. Sarah had never done this before, and it showed. She didn't know where to put her hands, how to move, what was expected. But Ezra guided her with patience and care, more concerned with her comfort than his own pleasure. It hurt at first, then stopped hurting, then became something else entirely. Sarah clung to him, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion and the sheer intimacy of it. When it was over, she buried her face in his shoulder and tried not to cry. "Hey," Ezra said softly, rolling to his side and pulling her close. "You all right?" "I don't know." Sarah's voice was muffled against his skin. I don't know." He held her, one hand stroking her hair. "We don't have to talk about it right now." They lay together in the darkness, their breathing synchronizing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window. Inside, Sarah felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of herself. She'd spent so long being alone, being unwanted, that she'd convinced herself she didn't need anyone, that needing someone was weakness. But lying here in Ezra's arms, feeling safe and warm and valued, Sarah realized that maybe needing someone wasn't weakness at all. Maybe it was just part of being human. "I think I might love you," she said quietly into the darkness. Ezra's arms tightened around her. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Sarah lifted her head to look at him. "I think maybe I have for a while. I just didn't recognize it." He smiled, that full, genuine smile she saw so rarely. "Good, because I meant what I said earlier. I'm completely in love with you." Sarah kissed him again, slower this time, less frantic. When they broke apart, she settled back against his chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we sleep. Tomorrow we get up and keep living, keep working, keep figuring this out together." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "That's all we can do." Sarah closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat under her ear. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Not because someone had sent her there, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she'd chosen it. And she'd keep choosing it every day for as long as Ezra wanted her, which, judging by the way he held her, might be a very long time indeed. Winter came to the mountains like a closing fist. The first real snow fell in mid-November, blanketing everything in white silence. Sarah woke to find Ezra already up, stoking the fire to fight off the cold that had seeped into every corner of the cabin overnight. "Snow's deep," he said, when she climbed down from the loft. Their loft now, no more pretending otherwise. 2 feet at least. More coming tonight, from the look of those clouds. Sarah peered out the window at a world transformed. The familiar trails had disappeared under pristine white, the trees bent under the weight of snow on their branches. Beautiful, but also isolating in a way that made her chest tight. How long will it last? This storm? Couple days, probably. Winter in general? Ezra poured her coffee. "We're up here until March, maybe April. Roads down to the valley won't be passable once the heavy snows start." "We're trapped here?" The word came out sharper than she intended. Ezra looked at her carefully. "We're snowed in. There's a difference. We've got food, firewood, shelter. We're fine." He paused. "But if you're feeling closed in, we can talk about it." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I'm not used to this. Being stuck in one place with nowhere to go." "I know it's different from what you're used to." He sat across from her. "But we prepared for this. We've got everything we need." Over the next few days, Sarah discovered he was right. The pantry was stocked with preserved vegetables, dried meat, sacks of flour and cornmeal. The root cellar held potatoes, carrots, turnips. They had coffee, sugar, salt. Even some treats, honey, dried fruit, a precious tin of tea. But being prepared didn't make it less strange. The world had shrunk to just the cabin, the barn, the immediate area they could reach by trudging through waist-deep snow. No town, no people, just the two of them. "We should have a wedding," Ezra said one evening as they sat by the fire. "A real one. Once the snow clears and people can travel." Sarah looked up from the socks she was darning. "We already had a wedding. We had a ceremony, quick and quiet, with your family practically pushing you out the door." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I want to do it right." Invite people who actually care about you. Celebrate properly. I don't know anyone here who cares about me. Mrs. Brennan does. She asks about you every time I'm in town. So does Anna Harris. He leaned forward, and there's others, people who've heard about you standing up to Brennan, who respect what you did. They think I'm difficult. Some do. Some think you're brave. Ezra reached for her hand. Either way, you're my wife. I want people to see us together, see that this is real. Sarah considered it. The idea of standing up in front of people, declaring her commitment to Ezra publicly, felt both terrifying and right. All right, she said. When spring comes, we'll have a wedding. Ezra smiled and kissed her knuckles. Good. The day settled into a rhythm. Ezra tended the animals, chopped wood, maintained the cabin and outbuildings. Sarah cooked, cleaned, mended, and read voraciously from Ezra's small collection of books. They worked on projects together, Ezra teaching Sarah basic carpentry so she could help repair broken tools, Sarah teaching Ezra her mother's method for making bread that stayed fresh longer. And at night they came together in the loft, learning each other's bodies with increasing confidence. Sarah discovered that Ezra was patient and attentive, always making sure she was with him before finding his own release. She learned what made him groan, where to touch him, how to move. It was still awkward sometimes. They'd bump heads or get tangled in the blankets or dissolve into laughter at inopportune moments. But it was theirs. 3 months into winter, on a bitter February morning, someone knocked on the door. Ezra and Sarah looked at each other in surprise. Nobody traveled in weather like this unless it was urgent. Ezra grabbed his rifle before opening the door. Who's there? It's Charlie Morrison, from town. I need to speak with you. Ezra opened the door to reveal a young man bundled in furs, his face red from cold. Snow clung to his beard and eyebrows. Charlie, Ezra pulled him inside. What the hell are you doing up here in this weather? Bringing news. Charlie stamped his feet, shedding snow. Your father-in-law's in town, Stone. Been there 2 days asking around about how to get up here. Sarah went cold. My father? Yes, ma'am. Charlie looked at her with something like pity. He's at the boarding house. Looks rough, thin, like he hasn't been eating right. Says he needs to talk to you. Says it's urgent. Sarah's hand started shaking. Ezra noticed and moved close to her. Did he say what he wants? Ezra asked. Just that he needs to see his daughter, that it's a family matter. Charlie accepted the cup of coffee Ezra handed him. Mrs. Brennan sent me up to warn you. Thought you'd want to know before he showed up unexpected. He can't get up here, can he? Sarah asked. In this snow? Not easily, but if he's desperate enough, he might try. Charlie drank his coffee gratefully. Mrs. Brennan said to tell you that you don't have to see him if you don't want to. She'll tell him you're not receiving visitors. Sarah sat down heavily. Her father. Here, after months of blessed silence, he'd appeared like a ghost from a life she'd tried to forget. What do you want to do? Ezra asked her quietly. I don't know. Sarah's voice sounded strange to her own ears. Why would he come all this way? In winter? Must be important to him, Charlie offered, or he's desperate. After Charlie left, loaded down with supplies and a fresh horse from Ezra's barn, Sarah and Ezra sat in tense silence. You don't have to see him, Ezra said finally. You don't owe him anything. I know. Sarah stared into the fire. But what if something's actually wrong? What if my mother's sick, or Clara, or... Then he can write a letter like a normal person. He doesn't get to show up and demand your time. He's my father. He's the man who hit you, who made you feel worthless, who couldn't wait to be rid of you. Ezra's voice was hard. Being related doesn't give him the right to hurt you again. Sarah knew he was right. But some part of her, the part that had spent 23 years trying to earn her father's approval, couldn't quite let go. I need to go to town, she said. Sarah, I need to face him, need to hear what he wants. She looked at Ezra. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering. It'll eat at me. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. We'll go together. Tomorrow, if the weather holds. But I'm staying with you the entire time. He doesn't get you alone. Agreed. They left at first light, riding the horses slow and careful through snow-packed trails. The journey that took 2 hours in good weather took nearly 6. By the time they reached Pinewood, Sarah was frozen solid despite her layers of clothing. Mrs. Brennan met them at the general store. "He's at the boarding house," she said without preamble. "Been asking everyone about you, about Ezra, about your life up here." Her expression was sour. "I don't like the man. Something about him feels wrong." "Thank you for the warning," Sarah said. "You want me to come with you?" Mrs. Brennan offered. "As a witness?" Sarah considered it, then shook her head. "No, but thank you." The boarding house was a narrow two-story building at the end of Main Street. Sarah's stomach churned as they tied up the horses outside. "Last chance to change your mind," Ezra said. "I know." They went inside. The proprietor, a thin woman named Mrs. Davis, pointed them toward the dining room. "He's in there. Been nursing the same cup of coffee for an hour." Samuel Blackwood sat at a corner table staring out the window. Sarah almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 6 months since she'd seen him. He looked up as they approached, and something flickered across his face. Relief? Fear? Sarah couldn't tell. "Sarah!" He stood, knocking over his coffee cup. "Thank heaven. I was worried you wouldn't come." "Mr. Blackwood," Ezra's voice was flat. "You wanted to see your daughter. Here she is. Say what you came to say." Samuel's eyes flickered to Ezra, then back to Sarah. "Can we speak privately?" "No," Sarah and Ezra said simultaneously. "Sarah, please, this is family business." "She is my family," Ezra said. "You lost that privilege when you cast her out." Samuel's face reddened. "I'm still her father. By blood only," Sarah cut in. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You wanted me gone. I'm gone. What do you want now?" Samuel sank back into his chair. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. "Everything's fallen apart," he said quietly. "The farm, the business, all of it." Sarah waited. "After you left, we thought things would get better. Rebecca was finally getting the attention she deserved. Clara was happier without your—" He stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. But then the Henderson deal fell through. "You remember Henderson? The merchant who wanted to buy your wheat harvest. He pulled out, said he'd heard things about our business practices, about how we treated our workers." Samuel's hands clenched on the table. "Then others started pulling out too. One by one. By winter, we had no buyers." Sarah felt Ezra tense beside her. She put a hand on his arm. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked. "We're broke, Sarah. Completely broke. The farm's mortgaged to the hilt. The bank's threatening foreclosure." Samuel finally looked at her directly. "I need your help." The room went very quiet. "My help," Sarah repeated slowly. "You're married to Ezra Stone. He's a wealthy man, successful, respected. He could loan us enough to save the farm, just until we get back on our feet." Sarah stared at her father. "You came all the way up here in the middle of winter to ask me for money?" "To ask for help. Family helps family." "Family helps family," Sarah echoed. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Where was the family when I was locked in my room for days because I spoke up about something wrong? Where was the family when you hit me hard enough to split my lip? Where was the family when you married me off to the first man who'd take me, just to be rid of the embarrassment?" "Sarah, that's not fair." "Not fair?" Her voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about how you made me feel worthless my entire life, how you punished me for having a spine, how you celebrated when I left because I was finally someone else's problem." Samuel's face had gone pale. "I know I wasn't perfect." "You weren't a father," Sarah said flatly. "You were a man who resented having a daughter he couldn't control." She stood. "And now that daughter is gone. She's not coming back to save you." "Please," Samuel's voice cracked. "The bank will take everything. Your mother, your sisters, they'll have nothing. They made their choices. They laughed while you sent me away. Rebecca told me I was lucky anyone would take me." Sarah's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "Now you can all live with the consequences." "Sarah, I'm begging you." "No." She turned to leave, but Samuel grabbed her wrist. Ezra moved like lightning, breaking Samuel's grip and putting himself between them. "Touch her again," he said quietly, "and you'll regret it." Samuel stepped back, his face twisted with anger and desperation. You've turned her against us, poisoned her mind. I gave her the truth, Ezra said. Something you never did. She knows her worth now. That's what you can't stand. Sarah. Samuel tried to look around Ezra. You're really going to let your family lose everything after everything we gave you? You gave me nothing but pain, Sarah said, and I owe you nothing in return. She walked out of the boarding house, Ezra close behind. Outside, the cold air hit her face like a slap, but she welcomed it. She was shaking all over now, adrenaline and anger and something else flooding through her. Sarah, Ezra started, I need to walk. She started down the street, not caring where she was going. Ezra followed silently. She made it to the edge of town before the tears came. Not sad tears, angry tears, frustrated tears. All the emotion she'd been holding back for 6 months, for years, pouring out in great heaving sobs. Ezra pulled her close, letting her cry into his coat. He didn't try to comfort her with words, didn't tell her it was okay. He just held her while she fell apart. When Sarah finally got control of herself, she pulled back and wiped her face roughly. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For crying. For making a scene. For... Sarah, stop. Ezra cupped her face in his hands. You just stood up to the man who terrorized you for years. You told him no. You chose yourself. He kissed her forehead. You have nothing to apologize for. He looked so desperate. That's not your problem. What if he was telling the truth? What if they really lose everything? Then they'll learn what it's like to have nothing. Like you did when they threw you away. Ezra's voice was firm. You are not responsible for their failures. Sarah nodded, trying to believe it. Can we go home now? Yeah, let's go home. They were halfway to the horses when someone called out, Mrs. Stone, wait! Sarah turned to see Anna Harris hurrying toward them, bundled in a heavy coat. I heard your father was in town, Anna said breathlessly. Are you all right? I'm fine, Sarah said. Did he want... Anna seemed unsure how to phrase it. He wanted money, Sarah said bluntly. I said no. Anna's eyes widened. Good for you. Tom said he had a bad feeling about that man the moment he saw him. She hesitated. I know we don't know each other well, but if you need anything, someone to talk to, a place to stay if you want to be in town for a bit, our door's open. Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. Thank you. We're planning a quilting circle next month once the weather clears. You should come. Mrs. Brennan will be there, and a few other women. It would be nice to get to know you better. I'd like that, Sarah said, and meant it. They said their goodbyes and mounted up. As they rode out of town, Sarah looked back once. Through the window of the boarding house, she could see her father still sitting at the table, alone. She felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but she felt no guilt either. He'd made his choices. Now she was making hers. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Sarah's mind churned over the confrontation, replaying every word, every expression. When they finally reached home, she was exhausted. Go inside and warm up, Ezra said. I'll tend the horses. Sarah went in and built up the fire, then sat staring into the flames. She felt hollow, scraped clean. When Ezra came in, he sat beside her without a word. They stayed like that for a long time. Do you think I'm cruel? Sarah asked finally. For refusing to help them? No. They might really lose the farm. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Either way, it's not your burden to carry. Ezra took her hand. You spent your whole life trying to earn their approval, their love. You sacrificed pieces of yourself to fit into their expectations, and it was never enough. It was never going to be enough. I know that now. Do you? Because right now you're sitting here feeling guilty for not rescuing the people who hurt you. He turned to face her fully. Sarah, listen to me. You don't owe them your money, your time, your energy, or your guilt. You owe them nothing. They're my family. I'm your family. He gestured around the cabin. This is your family. The people in town who asked about you, who offered you friendship without expecting anything in return, they're your family. Your father lost the right to call himself family when he raised his hand to you. Sarah leaned against him, exhausted. It still hurts. I know. It probably always will, a little bit. But it'll hurt less with time. He wrapped an arm around her. And you'll hurt less because you know you made the right choice. That night, Sarah lay in bed, unable to sleep. Ezra was beside her, his breathing deep and even. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. She thought about her father's face, the desperation, the anger when she'd refused him. Part of her felt like a monster for walking away. But another part, the part that was finally learning to stand up for herself, knew Ezra was right. She'd spent her whole life being told she was wrong, difficult, unworthy. And then she'd married a man who saw her clearly and loved her anyway, who stood beside her when she faced her demons, who gave her the freedom to choose her own path. Walking away from her father hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Sarah rolled over and curled against Ezra's warmth. He stirred slightly, his arm coming around her even in sleep. This was her life now, this cabin, this mountain, this man. Not perfect, nothing ever was, but hers, chosen, real, and no amount of guilt or obligation or familial expectation was going to take that away from her. When morning came, Sarah woke feeling clearer than she had in days. Ezra was already up, making breakfast. "How are you?" he asked when she came down. "Better?" Sarah poured herself coffee. "Still processing, but better." "Good." He set a plate in front of her. "I was thinking, once the snow clears enough, we should go ahead with those wedding plans. Make it official in front of the whole town. To prove a point? To celebrate. To show everyone that you're not the problem daughter they thought you were. You're my wife, my partner, my equal." He smiled. "And to throw a damn good party, because we deserve one." Sarah smiled back. "All right, let's do it." Over the next few weeks, they made plans. Ezra would talk to Pastor Matthews about doing a blessing ceremony. They'd hold the celebration at the church hall, nothing fancy, but proper. Invite everyone who'd shown them kindness. Sarah found herself looking forward to it, not because she needed validation from the town, but because she wanted to stand beside Ezra publicly and declare that this was her choice, that she was happy, that she'd found something real. A week later, Charlie Morrison came up the mountain again. This time, he brought a letter. "From your father," he said, handing it to Sarah. "He asked me to deliver it before he left town." Sarah took the envelope but didn't open it. "He's gone?" "Left yesterday. Looked even worse than when he arrived." Charlie shifted uncomfortably. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Brennan gave him an earful about how he'd treated you. Half the town heard it. He left pretty quick after that." After Charlie left, Sarah sat with the letter unopened in her hands. "You don't have to read it," Ezra said. "I know." But Sarah broke the seal anyway. The letter was short, written in her father's cramped handwriting. "Sarah, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I was wrong. About you, about what I said, about how I treated you. You were never the problem. I was. I saw strength in you that scared me. I saw independence I couldn't control. Instead of being proud, I tried to break you. I failed. And I'm glad I failed. The farm is lost. The bank took it last week. Your mother and sisters have moved in with your aunt. They're angry with me, as they should be. I've ruined everything. But watching you walk away from me in that boarding house, seeing the woman you've become, the strength you've found, I realize that you're the only one of us who made it out intact. You saved yourself when I tried to destroy you. I don't ask for your help. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong, and you were always right. Goodbye, Sarah." Father Sarah read it twice, then handed it to Ezra without a word. He read it, his expression unreadable. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing." Sarah stood and threw the letter into the fire. They watched it burn, the paper curling and blackening. "He's right. He was wrong. I was right. That's all there is to say." "You're not even a little bit tempted to help them?" "No." Sarah turned to face him. "Maybe that makes me cruel. Maybe it makes me cold. But I spent 23 years setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I'm done." Ezra pulled her close. "You're not cruel. You're finally putting yourself first. There's a difference." Sarah nodded against his chest. She felt lighter somehow, like burning that letter had burned away the last of her obligation to her past. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted in fits and starts, revealing muddy earth and new green shoots. The trails opened up again. Ezra's logging crew returned, ready for the spring harvest. And on a clear April morning, Sarah stood in the Pinewood church wearing a simple blue dress with wildflowers in her hair and married Ezra Stone for the second time. This time, the church was full. Mrs. Brennan sat in the front row, beaming. Anna Harris and her husband were there, along with Tom the blacksmith, Dr. Carlson, Charlie Morrison, and a dozen others Sarah had come to know over the winter months. This time, when Ezra took her hand and promised to love her, honor her, and stand beside her, Sarah believed every word. This time, when she promised the same in return, she meant it with her whole heart. And when they kissed, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was loud and joyful. There was food and music and dancing. Sarah found herself passed from partner to partner, learning steps she'd never been taught because her family had thought dancing frivolous. Late in the evening, she and Ezra slipped away from the party. They walked to the edge of town, looking up at the mountains that were home. "Happy?" Ezra asked. "Yes." Sarah leaned against him. "Truly happy." "No regrets?" "Just one." She looked up at him. "I regret all the time I wasted trying to be someone I wasn't, but I don't regret anything that led me here." Ezra kissed her, soft and sweet. "Good, because I'm not letting you go." "I'm not going anywhere." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Behind them, the sounds of celebration continued. Ahead of them, the mountains waited, solid and eternal. Sarah thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, broken, angry, convinced she was unlovable. She thought about her family, who'd tried so hard to make her small. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, free. Her family had meant to throw her away. Instead, they'd given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to find where she truly belonged. The months after the wedding settled into something Sarah had never experienced before: contentment. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of something schwetters beneath her feet. A foundation she could trust. Summer came hot and bright to the mountains. Ezra's logging operation ran full force, teams of men working the higher elevations while the weather held. Sarah found her own rhythm, managing the homestead while Ezra was occupied with business. She planted a larger garden than the year before, tended the chickens they'd acquired in spring, and started making her own preserves to sell in town. Mrs. Brennan had suggested it one afternoon at the quilting circle. "Your blackberry jam is better than anything I've tasted," she'd said. "You could sell it at the store. People would buy it." Sarah had been skeptical, but she'd brought 6 jars to town the following week. They sold within 2 days. By July, she was bringing 24 jars every week and still couldn't keep up with demand. "You're building something," Ezra said one evening, watching her label jars at the kitchen table. "Your own business. It's just jam. It's income, independence, something that's yours." He smiled. "I'm proud of you." Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest, pride. Not the desperate need for approval she'd felt with her family, but genuine satisfaction in her own accomplishment. The quilting circle became a regular part of her life. Every other Thursday, she'd ride down to Anna Harris's house, where 6 or 7 women would gather to sew and talk. Sarah learned that she genuinely liked these women. Their straightforward honesty, their quick humor, the way they supported each other without judgment. "How's married life treating you?" Anna asked one afternoon, threading her needle. "Better than I expected," Sarah admitted. "Ezra's a good man," Mrs. Brennan said. "Stubborn as a mule sometimes, but good." "Takes one to know one," Sarah replied, and the women laughed. It was during one of these circles in late August that Clara appeared. Sarah was helping Anna arrange fabric swatches when Mrs. Brennan came into the sitting room, her expression troubled. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you." Sarah looked up and felt her stomach drop. Clara stood in the doorway, looking thin and tired. Her dress was worn at the elbows, her shoes scuffed. She'd always been the softest of the sisters, but now she looked almost fragile. "Clara." Sarah stood slowly. "What are you doing here? Can we talk?" Clara's voice was small. "Please?" The other women exchanged glances. Anna stood. "Why don't we take a break? Give you two some privacy." They filed out, leaving Sarah and Clara alone in the sitting room. Sarah didn't sit down, didn't invite Clara to sit, just waited. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally. for showing up like this. I know you probably don't want to see me. What do you want? Clara flinched at the bluntness. Mother sent me. She thought maybe you'd listen to me since we were always closer. We were never close, Sarah said flatly. You were just nicer about your judgment than the others. That's fair. Clara's eyes welled up. Sarah, things are really bad. We're living with Aunt Margaret and she's not kind. She makes us work for our keep and she reminds us every day that we're charity cases. Rebecca's getting desperate, considering marriage proposals from men who… She stopped. We need help. So Mother sent you to beg on her behalf. She sent me to appeal to your better nature, to remind you that we're family. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. My better nature. The one you all tried to beat out of me for 23 years? She shook her head. Clara, do you remember when I was 15 and Father locked me in the cellar for 2 days because I questioned him in front of guests? Clara looked down. Yes. Do you remember coming to check on me? Bringing me water? I wanted to, but Mother said, You didn't, Sarah interrupted. None of you did. I sat in the dark for 2 days and not one of you stood up for me. She took a step closer. So don't talk to me about family. Don't talk to me about my better nature. You used up all my better nature years ago. We were wrong, Clara said desperately. We see that now. We treated you terribly and we're sorry. Are you? Or are you just sorry that your comfortable life fell apart? Sarah crossed her arms. Because I notice you never came to apologize when you still had money. You never wrote to say you missed me or that you regretted how things ended. You only showed up now when you need something. Clara's face crumpled. Please, Sarah. I know we don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. Not for Mother or Rebecca. For me. She wiped her eyes. I'm engaged to a man named Thomas Webb. He's a clerk, not wealthy, but kind. Good. He wants to marry me, but he's worried about taking on my family's debts. If you could just loan us enough to pay off the worst of it? No. The word hung in the air between them. Sarah, no, Sarah repeated. I'm not going to rescue you. I'm not going to enable Mother to continue treating people like possessions. And I'm certainly not going to bail out Rebecca, who laughed when Father sold me off to the first man who'd take me. What about me? Clara's voice rose. I never laughed. I never wanted you gone. I was just complicit, Sarah finished. You were complicit, Clara. You stood by and watched while they broke me down, and you did nothing. Being passive doesn't make you innocent. It just makes you a coward. Clara flinched like she'd been slapped. I was scared. So was I. Every day of my life in that house, I was scared. But I still stood up for what was right, even when it cost me everything. Sarah's voice softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. You want to marry Thomas Webb? Do it. Build a life with him, but do it without dragging your family's poison along with you. How am I supposed to do that? He won't marry me if it means taking on Mother and Rebecca. Then you make a choice. Sarah met her sister's eyes. You choose him, or you choose them. But you don't get to choose both and expect me to pay for it. Clara was crying openly now. You've become so hard. No, Sarah said quietly. I've become strong. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then you haven't learned anything. The door opened and Ezra stepped in. He must have arrived while they were talking. His eyes went to Sarah first, checking to make sure she was all right, then to Clara. Everything okay here? He asked. Clara was just leaving, Sarah said. Clara looked between them, Sarah standing tall and unmoved, Ezra's protective presence behind her. I'll tell Mother you said no. Tell Mother whatever you want. I don't care anymore. Clara walked to the door, then paused. I am sorry, Sarah, for what it's worth. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stand with you when it mattered. I know, Sarah said, but sorry doesn't fix anything. It just makes you feel better about what you did. After Clara left, Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room. The other women filtered back in, but Anna took one look at Sarah's face and quietly shooed them out. Come on, Ezra said gently. Let's go home. They rode back in silence. Sarah felt numb, wrung out. She'd thought confronting her father had closed that chapter of her life. Now Clara had ripped it back open, and Sarah felt raw all over again. When they reached the cabin, Sarah went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. She needed space, needed quiet, needed to process what had just happened. Ezra let her be for an hour. Then he knocked softly. "Can I come in?" Sarah opened the door. Ezra stepped inside and pulled her into his arms without a word. She stood there rigid at first, then slowly melted against him. "I hate that they still have this power over me," she said into his chest. "I hate that they can still make me feel like this." "Like what?" "Guilty. Like I'm doing something wrong by protecting myself." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "Am I wrong? For refusing to help Clara?" "No." Ezra's answer was immediate and certain. "You're not wrong. You're not responsible for fixing your family's mistakes." "But she's different from the others. She was never as cruel." "Being less cruel doesn't make her kind," Ezra said. "She stood by while you suffered. She's complicit in everything that happened to you. And now she wants you to rescue her from the consequences of those actions." He cupped Sarah's face. "You don't owe her that. You don't owe any of them that." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the image of Clara's face, desperate, pleading. What if something happens to her? What if Thomas doesn't marry her because of the debt? Then she'll survive. Like you survived. She'll learn to stand on her own, like you did. Ezra's voice was firm. Stop taking responsibility for other people's choices. They made their bed. Let them lie in it. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the loft listening to Ezra's breathing, her mind churning. Part of her knew he was right, knew that helping Clara would just enable the same patterns that had hurt her in the first place. But another part, the part that remembered being sisters when they were small, before everything got complicated, wanted to believe Clara was genuinely sorry, wanted to believe she could change. Around midnight, Sarah gave up on sleep and climbed down to sit by the dying fire. She was adding wood when Ezra appeared behind her. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much in my head." He sat beside her. "Want to talk about it?" Sarah stared into the flames. "I keep thinking about what you said, about Clara learning to stand on her own. But what if she can't? What if she's too weak, too conditioned by Mother and Rebecca to ever break free?" "Then that's on her, not you." "Is it, though?" Sarah turned to face him. "When you saw me at that market 4 years ago, standing up to Brennan, what if no one had ever taught me to do that? What if I'd been broken down so thoroughly that I couldn't see another way?" "But you weren't." "Only because I was stubborn enough to resist. Claire's not stubborn. She's soft, pliable. Mother and Rebecca will use her up and throw her away, and she'll let them because she doesn't know how to say no." Ezra was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking—" Sarah stopped, trying to organize her thoughts. "I'm thinking that I don't want to give them money. I don't want to enable Mother or Rebecca, but maybe I could help Clara differently." "How?" "By teaching her what you taught me, that she doesn't have to accept their judgment, that she can choose herself." Sarah looked at Ezra. "What if I offered to let her stay here for a while, away from them? Give her space to figure out who she is without their influence?" Ezra's eyebrows rose. "You want to invite your sister to live with us?" "Not permanently, just long enough for her to find her feet, to see that there's another way to live." Sarah rushed on before he could object. "I know it's a lot to ask, and I know she might not even accept, but if I don't try, if I just walk away completely, I'll always wonder if I could have made a difference. And if she comes here and brings all that family drama with her, then we set boundaries. We make it clear that she's welcome as long as she respects our space and our rules. But if she falls back into old patterns, if she tries to manipulate or guilt us, she leaves." Sarah grabbed his hand. "I'm not trying to save them, Ezra. I'm trying to save her. There's a difference." Ezra studied her face in the firelight. "You're sure about this?" "No, but I think I need to try. Not because I owe her anything, but because I want to be the kind of person who extends a hand to someone who might actually take it." "All right." Ezra squeezed her hand. "But we do this on our terms. She comes here, she works, she contributes. She doesn't get to be a guest who expects to be waited on." "Agreed." "And the first sign that she's trying to pull you back into that family mess, she goes. No second chances." "Agreed." Sarah rode to town the next morning and found Clara at the boarding house, preparing to leave. Her sister looked startled to see her. Sarah, what are you doing here? I have a proposition, Sarah said. Come walk with me. They walked to the edge of town, to the same spot where Sarah and Ezra had stood after her father's visit. Sarah took a breath and laid it out. I'm not going to give you money, she said. I'm not going to pay off your family's debts or enable mother's behavior. But I will offer you something else. Clara waited. Come stay with us. At the cabin. For a few months. Work alongside me, learn to stand on your own. Sarah held up a hand as Clara started to speak. This isn't charity. You'd work for your keep, help with the homestead, the garden, the preserves. And in return, you'd get space away from Mother and Rebecca. Time to figure out what you actually want instead of what they've told you to want. Clara stared at her. Why would you do that? Because I remember what it was like, being trapped in that house. Because I think maybe you actually want to change. You just don't know how. Sarah's voice hardened. But I need you to understand something. This offer comes with conditions. You respect me and Ezra. You respect our home. You work hard, and you don't bring family drama to our doorstep. And if you break those rules, you leave immediately. No arguments, no second chances. And Mother? Rebecca? They're not invited. This is about you, Clara, not them. Sarah met her sister's eyes. You need to choose them or your own future, but you can't have both. Clara's hands twisted together. I don't know if I can do that. Cut them off completely. I'm not asking you to cut them off forever. I'm asking you to put yourself first for once in your life, to see what happens when you're not constantly bending to their expectations. Sarah softened slightly. I'm offering you what Ezra offered me, a chance to find out who you are when no one's telling you who to be, but you have to want it. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, I'll try. You're sure? No, but you're right. I need to figure out how to stand on my own. And I can't do that living with Aunt Margaret and listening to Mother complain all day. Clara looked up. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. Pack light. You won't need fancy dresses where we're going. That night, Sarah told Ezra that Clara had accepted. He didn't look thrilled, but he didn't object either. 3 months, he said. We'll try it for 3 months. If it's working, we can extend. If it's not, she goes. Fair enough. Clara arrived the next morning with a single bag. Sarah helped her onto the spare horse, the mare Maple, who was gentle enough for an inexperienced rider, and they started up the mountain. The ride was awkward. Clara kept trying to make small talk, but Sarah wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine. Finally, about halfway up, Clara fell silent. When they reached the cabin, Clara looked around with wide eyes. It's so isolated. That's the point, Sarah said. Come on, I'll show you where you'll sleep. Sarah had prepared the small storage room off the kitchen, clearing out the supplies and setting up a cot with blankets. It was basic but clean. It's not much, Sarah said, but it's yours. Clara set down her bag. Thank you for this, for giving me a chance. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how hard the work is. Over the next few weeks, Sarah discovered that Clara was serious about trying. She woke early, helped with chores without complaining, and genuinely seemed interested in learning. Sarah taught her how to preserve vegetables, how to make jam, how to tend the chickens, and garden. But old habits died hard. Clara would slip sometimes, making self-deprecating comments about not being good enough, deferring to Sarah's judgment on everything, apologizing excessively for minor mistakes. Stop that, Sarah said one day, when Clara apologized for the 3rd time in an hour. Stop what? Apologizing for existing. You burned the bread. It happens. You don't need to act like it's the end of the world. But I wasted the flour, so we'll make more. The flour's there to be used, not worshipped. Sarah set down her work. Clara, you've got to stop seeing every mistake as proof that you're worthless. Sometimes things just go wrong. Clara bit her lip. Mother always said, Mother was wrong about a lot of things, especially about you. Sarah softened her tone. You're capable, Clara. You're learning fast. But you've got to stop beating yourself up every time something doesn't go perfectly. It was slow progress. But Sarah saw changes. Clara stopped apologizing as much, started offering her own opinions instead of always asking what Sarah thought, even laughed more, real laughter, instead of the nervous twitter she'd used back home. Ezra warmed to her gradually. He was polite but distant at first, protective of his space and his marriage. But when he saw that Clara was genuinely trying, that she wasn't trying to come between them or manipulate Sarah, he relaxed. One evening in late September, they were all sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Clara spoke up. "Thomas wrote to me," she said quietly. "He's still willing to marry me, even without the debt being paid off. He said if I'm willing to start fresh with him, just the two of us, he'll make it work." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "I wrote back and told him yes. But I also told him I want to stay here until November, finish what I started." Clara looked at Sarah. "Is that all right?" "Of course. I'm learning so much here, about myself, about what I'm capable of." Clara's voice grew stronger. "I want to go into this marriage as someone who can stand on her own, not as someone who needs rescuing." Ezra spoke for the first time. "Good for you. Thomas is a lucky man," Clara smiled. "I don't know about that, but I know I'm luckier than I deserve. Sarah could have turned me away. Instead, she gave me a second chance." "Not a second chance," Sarah corrected. "A first chance. To be yourself instead of who they told you to be." The weeks passed quickly. Clara threw herself into the work, determined to prove she could handle it. She learned to chop wood without nearly cutting off her fingers, learned to read the weather, even learned to ride well enough that Sarah let her take solo trips to town. In early November, Thomas came to visit. He was a quiet man in his late 20s, with kind eyes and a steady presence. Sarah watched how he looked at Clara, with respect, with affection, but not with ownership. He asked Clara's opinion on things, listened when she talked, treated her like an equal. "He's good for her," Ezra said that night after Thomas had gone back to town. "Yeah, he is," Sarah smiled. "I think she's going to be all right." Clara and Thomas married in mid-November, a quiet ceremony in town. Sarah and Ezra stood as witnesses. Afterward, Clara pulled Sarah aside. "I wrote to Mother," she said. "Told her I was getting married. Told her I wouldn't be coming back to live with her and Rebecca." "How did she respond?" "She said I was ungrateful, that I was abandoning my family in their time of need." Clara's voice was steady. "And I told her that I was choosing my own family now, that I loved her but I wouldn't let her guilt me anymore." Sarah felt pride swell in her chest. How did that feel? Terrifying, but right. Clara hugged her. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything, for showing me it was possible to say no, to choose myself. You did the hard part. I just gave you space to do it." After Clara and Thomas left to start their new life, Sarah and Ezra returned to their cabin. The place felt empty without Clara's presence, but it was a good empty, peaceful. "You did good," Ezra said that night, "with her. You gave her tools she needed." "I hope so. I hope she uses them." "She will. She's stronger than she thinks, just like someone else I know." He pulled Sarah close. "You're a good person, Sarah Stone. Better than most." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm not trying to be good. I'm just trying to be fair, to give people the chances I wish I'd been given earlier. That's what makes you good." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the first snow of the season started to fall. Winter came again, quieter this time. No desperate fathers appearing with demands, no sisters begging for help. Just Sarah and Ezra, living their life, working their land, building their future together. In February, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks. The exhaustion, the nausea, the way her body felt different, but she'd been afraid to hope, afraid to believe it was real. Dr. Carlson confirmed it when she went to town. "About 3 months along," he said. "Due in late summer, I'd say. How do you feel?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "That's normal. First time's always scary." He smiled. "But you're healthy, strong. You'll do fine." Sarah rode home in a daze. A baby. She was going to have a baby. She'd never thought much about motherhood, had assumed she'd never get the chance, and now it was happening, and she didn't know how to feel. Ezra knew something was wrong the moment he saw her face. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant," Sarah blurted out. Ezra went very still. "Pregnant. Due in late summer, Dr. Carlson confirmed it." Sarah searched his face, trying to read his reaction. How do you feel about that?" Ezra's face broke into the biggest smile Sarah had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. How do I feel? I feel amazing. We're going to have a baby. He set her down and kissed her deeply. I love you, and I'm going to love our child. This is everything. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I'm scared. I know, me too. Ezra pulled her close. But we'll figure it out together, just like everything else. The pregnancy was difficult. Sarah was sick constantly for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Her body ached and swelled. She had moments of panic where she was convinced something would go wrong, that she wasn't equipped to be a mother. But Ezra was there through all of it, taking over the cooking when the smell of food made Sarah nauseous, rubbing her back when it ached, holding her when the fear got too big, and the women of the town rallied around her. Mrs. Brennan brought over baby clothes her grandchildren had outgrown. Anna Harris organized a quilting bee specifically to make baby blankets. Even Clara came up from town when she could, showing Sarah the things Thomas's mother had taught her about infant care. You're going to be a wonderful mother, Clara said one afternoon. Better than ours ever was. I don't know about that. I do. Because you know what not to do. You know what it feels like to be made to feel small and wrong. You'll never do that to your child. Sarah hoped Clara was right. The baby came in late August, after 18 hours of labor that left Sarah exhausted and wrung out. Dr. Carlson delivered a healthy baby girl with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. Ezra cried when he held her for the first time. She's perfect, he said. Absolutely perfect. They named her Margaret after Sarah's grandmother, the one person in her family who'd ever treated Sarah with consistent kindness. Maggie for short. Sarah fell in love with her daughter immediately and completely. This tiny, helpless creature who depended on her for everything. It was terrifying and overwhelming and the most right thing Sarah had ever experienced. She was a fussy baby, cried at odd hours, refused to sleep unless someone was holding her, seemed to have opinions about everything despite being only weeks old. She's just like you, Ezra said one night at 3 a.m, walking the floor with a screaming Maggie. Stubborn and loud and convinced she's right. Are you complaining? Never. I happen to love stubborn and loud. He kissed the baby's head. Even at 3 a.m. Life reorganized itself around Maggie's needs. Sarah learned to function on broken sleep, to nurse while doing other tasks, to judge the difference between different types of cries. It was harder than any work she'd ever done, but also more rewarding. When Maggie was 3 months old, Sarah took her to town for the first time. The women at the quilting circle cooed over her, passing her around carefully. She's beautiful, Mrs. Brennan said, and already so alert. Look at how she watches everything. She's curious, Sarah said. Never wants to miss anything. As Sarah sat there, surrounded by women who'd become her friends, holding her daughter, she felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. This life, this community, this love, this purpose. It was everything she'd never known to want. That evening, as Sarah sat on the porch with Maggie in her arms and Ezra beside her, she thought about her family, about her father's desperate visit, about Clara's transformation, about the life she'd left behind. She felt no bitterness toward them anymore, no anger, no resentment, just distance. They were part of her past, but they had no claim on her future. What are you thinking about? Ezra asked. How strange life is. How the things we think will destroy us sometimes save us instead. Sarah looked down at Maggie's sleeping face. My family thought they were getting rid of a problem, but really, they were setting me free. Best mistake they ever made. For me, anyway. For them, Sarah shrugged. I hope they're learning. I hope they're finding their own way, but that's not my responsibility anymore. Ezra took her hand. You've come a long way from the woman I married. So have you. No, he said. I've been the same. I just finally found someone worth being that way for. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out. Maggie stirred in Sarah's arms but didn't wake. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and steady. Sarah thought about all the paths that had led her here. The painful ones. The scary ones. The moments where she'd wanted to give up. Every single one had been necessary. Every single one had taught her something she needed to know. She'd learned that strength wasn't about never being hurt. It was about surviving the hurt and choosing to keep going anyway. She'd learned that family wasn't always the people you were born to. Sometimes it was the people who chose you, and who you chose in return. She'd learned that saying no to what was wrong for you was just as important as saying yes to what was right. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was enough, not because someone else had validated her, but because she'd finally validated herself. "I love you," she said to Ezra. "I love you too. And I love this life, everything about it, even the hard parts. Even the 3 a.m. crying sessions? Especially those," Sarah smiled, "because they're ours. Our struggles, our joys, our everything." Maggie made a small sound in her sleep. Sarah looked down at her daughter and felt her heart expand to hold even more love than she'd thought possible. This baby would grow up knowing she was wanted, knowing she was valued for who she was, not who someone else needed her to be. Knowing that her voice mattered, that her strength was a gift, that her stubborn insistence on truth was something to be proud of. Sarah would make sure of it. Years from now, when Maggie was old enough to ask about her family, Sarah would tell her the truth. About the grandmother and aunts she barely knew. About the difficult choices Sarah had made. About the family she'd left behind to build something better. And she'd tell Maggie the most important truth of all, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to walk away from people who make you small, even if they share your blood. That choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. That you can't pour from an empty cup, and sometimes you have to fill your own cup first before you can help anyone else fill theirs. Sarah had learned these lessons the hard way, but she'd learned them, and she'd make sure her daughter never had to learn them through pain the way she had. The night grew cold, and Ezra stood. "We should go inside before Maggie freezes." Sarah let him help her up, mindful of the sleeping baby. They went into the warm cabin, into the home they'd built together, into the life Sarah had chosen. She wasn't the wrong daughter. She'd never been the wrong daughter. She'd just been born into the wrong place, with people who couldn't see her value. But she'd found her way out, found her people, found herself. And that made all the difference. Sarah tucked Maggie into the cradle Ezra had built, watching her daughter sleep. This tiny person who would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, who would learn from Sarah's example that you could be strong and soft at the same time, that you could stand up for yourself and still be kind, that you could choose your own path even when everyone else insisted you were going the wrong way. Ezra came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Best thing I ever did was ask your father for your hand," he murmured. "Best thing I ever did was say yes," Sarah replied. Then she corrected herself. "No, best thing I ever did was stay, and keep choosing to stay every single day since." "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." They stood there in the lamplight, watching their daughter sleep, and Sarah finally understood what home felt like. Not a place, though she loved this cabin in the mountains. Not a person, though she loved Ezra with her whole heart. Home was the feeling of being exactly where you belonged, of being seen and valued for who you truly were, of building something with your own hands and knowing that no one could take it from you. Her family had tried to throw her away like she was trash, like she was a problem that needed solving, a burden that needed removing. But what they'd actually done was give her the push she needed to find her real life. The life that had been waiting for her all along, if only she'd been brave enough to reach for it. Sarah smiled in the darkness. She'd been brave enough, barely, but enough. And she'd keep being brave. For Maggie, for Ezra, for herself. Because that's what you did when you'd been broken down and built yourself back up. You stood tall, you held your ground, you chose yourself again and again, until choosing yourself became as natural as breathing. That was Sarah's gift to her daughter. Not money, not status, not a perfect life free from struggle, but the knowledge that she could survive anything. That she was strong enough, brave enough, worthy enough, exactly as she was. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest inheritance anyone could give. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside, the cabin stayed warm, safe, home. Sarah climbed into bed beside Ezra, his arm coming around her automatically, even in sleep. She closed her eyes and let herself sink into the comfort of knowing that tomorrow would come, and she'd face it the same way she faced everything now, on her own terms, with her head up and her spine straight, exactly as she'd always been meant to be.